Almost every species in Star Wars has a home world, a name, and a history you can look up. Yoda has none of it. After nearly 50 years of films, series, novels, and comics, the official records still list the same two words where the answer should be: species unknown. That blank space is not an oversight. It is the most carefully protected secret in Star Wars, and Lucasfilm has guarded it on purpose for decades. And what sits behind that silence is harder to explain than the secrecy is. Every known member of this species is connected to the Force at a level almost nothing else in the galaxy reaches. They live for 900 years and spend the first 50 of those as infants. A 50-year-old of their kind is still a toddler who cannot feed himself, and still strong enough to lift a fully grown beast off the ground with his mind. And across 4,000 years of recorded history, not one of them has ever fallen to the dark side. No other Force-sensitive species can say that. Humans produce both Luke Skywalker and the Emperor. This one has produced Jedi, and nothing but Jedi, for as long as anyone has been keeping records. Over the next 2 hours, all of it gets pulled into the open. It starts with the powers no other species in the galaxy can match. It ends with why the handful of them still alive may already be past saving. Some of what follows is canon, and some is legends, and the difference gets marked as it comes up. A good deal of what is known about this species survives only in the older material. It starts on a hangar floor in Geonosis, where an 800-year-old Jedi walked in on a fight 2 younger men had already lost. Qui-Gon used it. Obi-Wan used it. Ahsoka uses it. But across 25,000 years of galactic history, only one species has ever truly mastered Form 4. And the reason isn't training, it's biology. On Geonosis in 22 BBY, Count Dooku had already put down 2 Jedi in a single hangar. He blasted Anakin Skywalker's side with Force lightning, wounded Obi-Wan Kenobi in the shoulder and thigh, and severed Anakin's arm at the elbow. Then, he turned to face the figure stepping into the hangar. The figure stood roughly 2 feet 2, weighed 13 kilograms, and was 874 years old. And what he was about to do, no other body in the galaxy had ever done. A Jedi leaps, feet above the ground, saber angled down, the descent is timed so the blade lands before the body does, while the opponent is still bringing his guard up. That single image, repeated across 1,000 frames of Star Wars footage, is the signature of one combat style. That style was Form 4, which the Jedi called Ataru, the aggression form. Ataru was the 4th of 7 classical lightsaber forms taught at the Jedi Temple, named and cataloged in Star Wars Insider's Fight Saber article, and later expanded in Daniel Wallace's The Jedi Path, a manual for students of the Force. It sat just past Suresu, the shield form, in the teaching order. The Jedi Path described Ataru as, in many ways, the inverse of Suresu, where Suresu answered Force with defense, Ataru answered Force with motion. Ataru's answer was to stop defending and start moving. The form was built on Force-assisted acrobatics, aerial attacks, and overwhelming offensive momentum. Practitioners use leaps, spinning strikes, and rapid changes in elevation to overwhelm an opponent from angles a standing duelist could not cover. The goal was not to trade blows along a single line. The goal was to flood the enemy's guard with motion, then land the strike from somewhere the guard was not. Ataru did not outmuscle, it outspaced. By contrast, every other classical form kept the fight on the ground. Makashi stayed close and elegant, Suresu stayed tight and defensive, Gemso rooted itself in strength, and Niman balanced the saber with Force techniques. Juyo and its darker derivative, Vapad, drew from raw internal intensity. Every one of them fought the duel at roughly the same horizon. Only Ataru fought it in 3 dimensions at once, and that was not a style choice, it was a response to a specific combat problem. The form lets smaller, physically outmatched practitioners compensate for their own disadvantages. Smaller, faster practitioners could use height and angle to turn the fight into something a bigger body could not follow. A leap became a strike, a flip became a repositioning, and motion itself became the weapon. That advantage, however, came with a price. Ataru demanded open space for its sweeping arcs, constant engagement with the Force to power the leaps and flips the form required, and the cardiovascular endurance, joint resilience, and recovery time that sustained attack demanded. Many Jedi across the Order's history learned the basic footwork, the entry leaps, and the standard aerial strikes. They could perform Ataru in a training hall and cite the principles from memory, but learning Ataru was not the same as mastering it. Mastery meant sustaining the form through a full career in real combat without the body collapsing under what the style demanded. 10 years before that hangar figure stood on Geonosis, another Ataru practitioner had walked into a very different duel on a different planet and had not walked out of it. Qui-Gon Jinn's master had been Count Dooku at the Jedi Temple. The pairing was unusual from the start, because Dooku's personal specialty was Form 2 Makashi, the duelist style, and Qui-Gon's was Form 4 Ataru, the aggression style. A Makashi master training an Ataru student spent years watching the apprentice fight from the inside. Every weakness of the form, every opening it left on the descent, every moment a practitioner's body could not quite do what the form demanded, Dooku saw all of it, across every sparring session, for as long as Qui-Gon was his apprentice. What he was gathering in those years would not pay off for decades. On Naboo in 32 BBY, Qui-Gon was a seasoned Jedi in the late stages of his career. The sources disagree on exactly how late. Canon places him in his late 40s, Legends in his early 60s, but both agree on what that meant against an opponent in his early 20s. The duel in the Theed generator ran in rising gear, Qui-Gon pressing forward with Ataru's signature tempo, Maul matching every beat with a spinning double-bladed guard. When the laser gate slammed shut and separated Qui-Gon from his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi, the fight narrowed into the melting pit chamber. The interval between Qui-Gon's strikes grew longer, his recovery between exchanges grew slower, and an older body was operating a form designed for younger ones. The form did not fail him. His body could no longer do what it demanded. Then, Naboo happened, and Obi-Wan walked away from the form that had taken his master's life. Obi-Wan Kenobi had learned Ataru directly from Qui-Gon and used it throughout his early career. But after Naboo, he committed himself to Form 3 Suresu, the defensive form built to outlast an opponent rather than overwhelm one. Star Wars Insider framed the shift as a deliberate response to what had taken his master's life. Matthew Stover's novelization of the third prequel film confirmed the result of that commitment. By the end of the Clone Wars, Mace Windu recognized Kenobi not merely as a Suresu master, but as the master of the form. That recognition was why the Jedi Council sent him after General Grievous on Utapau in 19 BBY. Ahsoka Tano kept a piece of Ataru alive, but in a different body and a different stage of life. Tano fought in a reverse script Jarkai style, described in Clone Wars era reference works as an Ataru-Xian hybrid, and she was young enough to have the joints, the reflexes, and the recovery time the aerial work demanded. She was not alone on the Clone Wars roster. Aayla Secura carried Form 4 into the war in the Legends record, trained by her own master, Quinlan Vos. Kit Fisto, often shown flipping and spinning alongside them, was a recognized master of Form 1 Shi Cho, the simplest form taken to its highest expression. Daniel Wallace's The Jedi Path, a manual for students of the Force, described Ataru's demands in direct terms. Practitioners drew constantly on the Force to power leaps, flips, and aerial strikes, and they could not sustain that output forever. The manual framed the form as something the body had to support, not just the mind. Every exchange cost energy the practitioner had to recover before the next one, and against a younger, fresher opponent in a confined space, those recovery windows close. For a human Jedi, Elite Ataru performance had a natural window measured in decades, not centuries. No reference source has pinned a specific number on it, but the record told the same story. Inside that window, the form was relentless. Outside it, the body started refusing what the form demanded. Obi-Wan Kenobi's shift to Suresu after Naboo was the clearest case. The young Jedi had watched his own teacher's career end in the one environment Ataru was never built for, and Kenobi moved to a form that did not demand the same body. On screen, his later style retained some aerial work, but the spine of his combat changed. Kenobi became a Suresu Jedi who could still jump, rather than an Ataru Jedi paying the price every time he did. The brutal arithmetic of the style was that it demanded the most from the body during the years the body could give it, and then asked for more during the years the body was already giving back. A human Jedi facing that math made a choice. Some, like Qui-Gon, held a line and trusted the Force to carry them past the limits. Others, like Kenobi, read the same math and switched forms. A few, like Ahsoka Tano, were still on the near side of the window and had not yet made the choice. One species in the galaxy operated on a different clock entirely. That species had not escaped the biological math. It had simply been handed a different equation: longer careers, smaller frames, and a relationship with the Force that started at birth rather than through training. Every pressure that broke Ataru practitioners after decades of practice was a pressure this one species was built to absorb. For humans, Form 4 has an expiration date. For Yoda's species, it doesn't. Star Wars Timelines places Yoda's birth in 896 BBY, which made the hanger figure from Geonosis 874 years old, with 3 more years of active combat ahead of him before Order 66 ended the Jedi Order. That kind of combat window was not a human number, it was not a Wookiee number either, or a Twi'lek number, or any number any other species in the Jedi Order's recorded history could show. Ataru had taken Qui-Gon's career at 50. Yoda's species held the same form for 800 years. The question was what made the difference. Lifespan was the first observation, and the most obvious. Star Wars Alien Archive, supported by Star Wars Timelines, describes a natural lifespan measured in centuries rather than decades, with Yoda living to roughly 900 years and Yaddle still on the Jedi High Council in her late 400s. A species member who reached mastery at 200 had hundreds of years left to refine the same techniques against new opponents. But lifespan alone did not explain it. A long-lived body that still took the same physical impacts, landing after landing across 1,000 fights, should have aged out of Ataru the same way a human body did, just later. The form's wear accumulated per movement, not per year. Something else had to be reducing the cost of each movement itself. That something was body mass. Star Wars Absolutely Everything You Need to Know placed Yoda at roughly 13 kilograms, or about 29 pounds. An average human Jedi weighed 5 to 7 times that much. Every Ataru demand that came from physical impact, the landings, the spinal compression from overhead flips, the recovery load between exchanges, scaled directly with body weight. A 13 kilogram body absorbed a fraction of what a 70 kilogram body did. Where a human master accumulated joint wear across 4 decades of combat, a species member accumulated it far more slowly, because the physics of each movement were gentler on smaller tissue. This answered part of the question, but not all of it. Physical impact was one cost. Ataru demanded constant force engagement to power the leaps and control the descents. A human Jedi could train that skill, but the force engagement sat on top of a body that had lived its early life without it. The body learned to draw on the force. It was not built around the force. For Yoda's species, that was not true. Star Wars Alien Archive catalogs every known member of the species as force sensitive, and Yoda, Yaddle, and Grogu all showed that sensitivity from earliest life. The implication Ataru demanded was not a technique layered onto their combat. It was already part of how they moved, from the first time they moved at all. That still left the hardest part of the mystery. Small bodies with force sensitivity should have let a species member master Ataru young and retire from it old, the way humans did, just at a different scale. Yaddle fought at 477, Yoda at nearly 900. These were not compressed careers with earlier peaks, they were full mastery held across centuries. The body was not just absorbing the cost, it was somehow refusing to decline. Star Wars Alien Archive, supported on screen by The Mandalorian's dialogue about Grogu at age 50, describes the species as remaining in infancy for at least 50 standard years and reaching full development by around the 100th. Past development, the curve flattened. Yoda looked recognizably himself across 3 centuries of recorded order history. Yaddle held her physical form for roughly 4 centuries of active service. The species lived on a long plateau of preserved combat capability followed by a late decline, rather than the steady downslope a human body took from its 30s onward. That plateau did more for Ataru mastery than any single biological trait, because Ataru demanded consistent physical output over decades of refinement. A human Jedi got one good window, a species member got dozens. Yoda, Yaddle, and Grogu all presented with three-fingered hands ending in small claws. That hand structure appeared consistently across the species in every reference. A three-fingered hand with clawed tips gripped a lightsaber hilt differently from a five-fingered humanoid hand. The claws anchor the fingers against the hilt during sustained overhead swings, and the grip produced a different rotational leverage on the blade. None of that was a deliberate design choice by the species or by the form's creators. It was simply what the species happened to have, and it served the precise kind of combat Form 4 required. The hand was not the headline trait. It was the one that almost went unnoticed. No other species in the recorded Jedi Order combined all 5 traits. Humans had skill, but not time. Wookiees had longevity, but not the frame. Nautolans had the force connection, but not the scale. Twi'leks had the flexibility, but not the plateau. The combination sat in exactly one place, and that combination was not something the Jedi Order trained into Yoda's species. It was something they walked in the door with. Every biological trait the species has, Ataru rewards, which leaves the Jedi archives holding a question they never answered. The form's recorded origin is thin. Legend sources trace Ataru's earliest documented use to the Mandalorian Wars era, roughly 4,000 years before the Empire. Before that, the archives go quiet. The Order's story is simple enough. The form was developed, it spread, and Yoda's species, like other Jedi species, happened to master it. Except the timing creates a problem. The senior Jedi at the Dantooine Enclave during those same Mandalorian Wars, holding the leading seat on the Council at the precise era Ataru enters the record, was Vandar Takare, a member of Yoda's species. That's circumstantial evidence, not proof. But it's not nothing either. A form rewarding exactly one biology across a galaxy of thousands does not look like a coincidence of training. It looks like either a form built by the species for itself in an earlier era the Order never cataloged, or a species that walked into a new form and found the grip already fitted to their hand. The archives do not say which. The archives do not say because the species was there when the archives started. In 32 BBY on Coruscant, Yaddle, an Ataru-trained member of the Jedi High Council who would step down that same year, confronted a fallen Count Dooku and did not walk out of the meeting. Her death sits at the end of a line that ran across 4,000 years. A decade after Yaddle fell, the Grand Master of the Order stepped into a hangar on Geonosis and opened his own duel with Dooku. The first exchange was not Form 4 at all. Dooku hurled debris and force lightning, and Yoda deflected and absorbed both. Only after the fallen Count declared the contest could not be settled by their knowledge of the Force did Yoda ignite his lightsaber and launch into the spinning, acrobatic, elevation-changing work that Ataru was built for. Dooku's Makashi countered most of it, and the duel ended in stalemate when the fallen Jedi toppled a massive hangar column towards the wounded Obi-Wan and Anakin, forcing Yoda to break engagement to hold the mass with the Force. 3 years later, in 19 BBY, Ataru met a different kind of opponent. After Order 66 eliminated most of the Jedi Order, Yoda returned to Coruscant and entered the Senate chamber to face Darth Sidious. In the duel in the Galactic Senate, the Dark Lord hurled waves of Senate pods at Yoda using the Force, and the Jedi Master leapt between them, dodging from one to the next with his own Force powers. Later in the fight, Yoda was knocked to the Senate floor. As clone troopers closed on his position, the Grand Master retreated through the ventilation shafts and escaped with Bail Organa. The circumstances had closed around the form, not the other way around. Earlier in the Order's record, the same combat signature appeared in the Deep Legends era. Vandar Takare led the Dantooine Jedi Council during the Mandalorian Wars around 3964 BBY, and the Knights of the Old Republic campaign guide gives him the Ataru lightsaber form and dual lightsaber proficiency. Dual Shotos, short lightsabers, held and moved in a combat style almost no humanoid body could sustain. Vandar did not stop at holding them. Through a force technique called improved kinetic combat, he could wield his shotos without holding them, striking with them telekinetically through the force. A pint-sized Jedi described as olive skin in reference books but rendered with an orange tan tone in the 2003 video game, sat at the top of a council that would argue bitterly with Revan and the Exile when they chose to fight the Mandalorians against the Council's will. Vandar was among the more sympathetic voices in that debate, and the form that carried him was Ataru. 15 centuries later, another member of the species turned up in a role no other Jedi of his kind ever held. A species whose entire documented record is small-frame acrobatic combat, produced around 3600 BBY, a fleet commander. Otek served as a Jedi Master and Fleet Admiral of the 1st Expeditionary Fleet, and Star Wars The Old Republic shows him leading the Maelstrom prison operation to rescue Revan from Sith imprisonment. His personal saber form was never specified, but his presence in an Admiral's chair pushed the species thread across another full era, and into a kind of command that would not appear in the species' record again. Roughly 7 centuries before the Battle of Yavin, a different kind of Yoda species duel played out on a swampy world on the galactic fringe. A Bipfashi Force user had fallen to the dark side and was cutting a trail across the Sluice sector that the Jedi Order could no longer stand. Minch, a Jedi Knight from Yoda's species, was sent after him. The Bipfashi fled to Dagobah, a planet of black water and twisted trees, and took refuge inside a cave that would become a nexus of the dark side through what happened next. The legend's short Heart of Darkness depicts the duel. Minch entered the cave alone, carrying a green-bladed lightsaber, and fought in an aggressive two-handed style. The Bipfashi had the terrain on his side, the geometry of the passages and the darkness already pulling in them. Minch had centuries of trained combat and the species' natural force sensitivity. The duel ended with the fallen Bipfashi dead inside the cave. The act of dying there at the hands of a light-side Jedi anchored the shadow to the ground. That place stayed dark. 7 centuries later, when another member of Yoda's species needed a hiding place the Empire would never find, Yoda went to Dagobah. The dark side energy that Minch had left behind was dense enough to mask Yoda's own light side presence from the Emperor. The dark side cave was not a discovery he made on the planet. It was the reason he chose it. The thing that made Dagobah usable as a hiding place was the same thing that made it dangerous to live near, and the order that put Minch on that path was the order Yoda was now the last survivor of. At the start of the Geonosis duel with Yoda, Count Dooku raised a saber in salute. Curved hilt, one-handed grip, ceremonial pose. Every Ataru duelist in the galaxy would have recognized that signature. The salute belonged to Form 2, Makashi, the contention form. Daniel Wallace's The Jedi Path, a manual for students of the Force, described Form 2 Makashi as a style built for precision, economy of motion, and single-opponent dueling. Where Ataru flooded the guard with motion, Makashi refined the blade down to a single point of pressure and waited for the opening. Where Ataru moved the body, Makashi moved the wrist. Makashi didn't chase the acrobat, it drew the leap, and it intercepted the body coming down. Matthew Stover's novelization of the 3rd prequel film detailed the specific mechanic. Against an Ataru duelist, a Makashi practitioner did not engage the leap, he provoked it. Per the novel, Dooku drove thrusts at his opponent's legs to draw the Ataru user into a flipping overhead leap so that he could burn through the body from kidneys to shoulder blades on the descent. The mechanic was the entire counter: force the leap, then strike the back on the return. The novelization describes Dooku attempting exactly that tactic against Obi-Wan aboard the Invisible Hand, and finding it stonewall because Kenobi had become a master of Suresu and his Ataru and Shicho openings had been ploys. Count Dooku didn't learn that counter from a library, he learned it from his own apprentice. Stover's novelization puts it directly: Dooku had fenced Qui-Gon thousands of times, and he knew every weakness of the Ataru form, with its ridiculous acrobatics. He had collected that knowledge across a full apprenticeship. When the Count left the Order and turned to the shadow of the Force, that knowledge became a weapon waiting for a target. The first target was another member of Yoda's species. Inside the Lemerge power building on Coruscant, on a day in 32 BBY shortly after Qui-Gon's funeral, Yaddle was 477 years old and had just realized that her old council colleague Count Dooku had fallen to the shadow of the Force. She confronted him alone. Between them was roughly 400 years of Jedi service on her side, and on his, decades of watching Ataru from the inside of Qui-Gon's apprenticeship and knowing exactly where the form broke. Yaddle opened the way she had been trained to open. Force levitation, fluid body motion, acrobatic counters across the floor of the chamber, the same Form 4 framework Yoda would bring into Dooku's hangar a decade later. Star Wars Alien Archive puts it directly. Like Yoda, she learned the lightsaber form Ataru. Dooku did not engage her leaps. He set up for them. Strikes came in low, forcing her to rise over them, and he waited for the descent that Ataru's own geometry required. Decades of watching Qui-Gon had taught him exactly this sequence. He knew what the form demanded a practitioner do with her feet, her spine, her guard. He knew where Ataru left a body exposed between one leap and the next. The end came through the architecture of the building itself. Dooku slammed down a heavy hangar bay gate on top of her, using the bay's controls and the Force together. She caught it. For a moment, the full mass of the gate hung suspended on her Force lift. She lifted the gate back up with the Force, a final display meant to reach Dooku one more time and hold him to the light. The effort broke her. Yaddle collapsed to the floor of the chamber, exhausted, the gate falling behind her. Dooku walked towards her. Yaddle on the ground was no longer an Ataru practitioner in motion. She was a small body in a robe, 477 years old, looking up at a Jedi she had known for decades. Under Sidious's order to kill her, Dooku delivered the strike. A single lightsaber slash, framed in the episode as the gift of peace, ended her. The Makashi counter his former apprentice had unknowingly taught him was not the blade that killed her. It was the blade that brought her to the floor. By the time Yaddle hit the ground, the knowledge Dooku had built from sparring Qui-Gon had already done its work. Only one combat form in the galaxy had ever taken a species member's life with a blade, and it had taken hers. The species owns Ataru. Ataru owns every other species' joints. Makashi owns the species. Even so, the species Ataru line had not ended. Somewhere on the galactic rim, under a Mandalorian's protection, a species member not yet out of infancy continued to grow. Grogu had not committed to any saber form by 9 ABY, and he had not picked a lightsaber of his own. The Mandalorian establishes Grogu at age 50, still an infant. Star Wars Alien Archives and Star Wars timelines place full maturity for the species around 100 standard years. Most adult members of the species live for centuries, and Yoda himself reached 900. The next Yoda species, Ataru Master, had not yet reached the start of his prime. He was still in the long infancy the species required before the body could hold what the form demanded. Somewhere, a 50-year-old child is still learning to walk. When he picks up a lightsaber, the species' hold on Form 4 will not break. It'll begin its next chapter. Grogu is the newest name on a list far shorter than it should be. Going back 4,000 years, only a handful of them have ever been documented at all, and every single one turned up inside the Jedi Order. Their names, their ranks, and how each of them died make up the only census this species has ever had.
In over 4,000 years of galactic history, only 7 story-relevant members of Yoda's species have ever been recorded. They have no known homeworld, no species name, and no explanation for their extraordinary connection to the Force. Yet every recorded member demonstrated extraordinary Force abilities, with most rising to the highest ranks of the Jedi Order. Drawing from both Canon and Legends sources, this is every member of Yoda's species explained. The first and earliest known member of Yoda's species lived nearly 4,000 years before the Empire rose to power. His name was Vandar Tokare, and he served on the Jedi Council during some of the most devastating wars the galaxy had ever seen. In the Legends continuity, Vandar appears in the video game Knights of the Old Republic, set in 3956 BBY. He stood roughly the same height as Yoda, with the same green skin and large pointy ears. Notably, Vandar mostly spoke with normal grammar, though he occasionally used slight inversions without the consistent backwards sentence structure that Yoda would later become famous for, a distinction that becomes important when examining the other members of this species. Vandar served on the Dantooine Jedi Enclave Council during the Mandalorian Wars, when the warrior clans nearly conquered the entire Republic. He watched a promising young Jedi named Revan defy the Council and lead a faction of Jedi to war. That decision saved the Republic, but it also corrupted Revan completely, and the young hero returned as Darth Revan, a Sith Lord who nearly destroyed the very order he once served. Vandar also helped train one of the era's most important Jedi, Bastila Shan. Her rare gift of battle meditation could turn the tide of entire wars by boosting Allied morale while crushing the enemy's will to fight. When Revan threatened to overwhelm the Republic with his Sith armada, Bastila's abilities became the Jedi's greatest weapon, and Vandar recognized her potential and helped nurture it. That training would prove decisive in the war to come. After Revan was captured and his memory erased by the Jedi Council, Vandar helped guide the former Sith Lord back to the light. He was present when Revan discovered the Star Forge, an ancient factory producing endless fleets for the Sith Empire, and he saw Revan make the choice to destroy the Star Forge rather than claim its power. For a brief moment, it seemed the Jedi had won. The victory did not last. 4 years after those events, in 3952 BBY, Jedi Master Atris secretly called a conclave on the planet Katar, hoping to identify the mysterious Sith threat that was systematically hunting Jedi across the galaxy. Vandar attended that gathering, unaware that Atris had deliberately leaked its location, hoping to draw out the enemy. The enemy who came was Darth Nihilus, a being of pure hunger who consumed life through the Force. Nihilus was not a typical Sith Lord because he had become something else entirely, a wound in the Force that fed on living energy. When Nihilus arrived at Katar, he consumed every living thing on the planet's surface, and millions died in an instant. Vandar Tokare, the first recorded member of Yoda's species, perished alongside his fellow Jedi. Only one being survived, a Miracula named Visas Mar, whom Nihilus took as his apprentice. Though Vandar had fallen to the Sith, he would not be the last of his kind to face them. Moving on, the second member of Yoda's species existed approximately 300 years later. His name was Oteg, and he rose to prominence in the Jedi Order around 3643 BBY during the Great Galactic War between the Republic and the resurgent Sith Empire. He served as a Jedi Master and Fleet Admiral, commanding the Republic's first expeditionary fleet from the bridge of the dreadnought Talos. Like Vandar before him, Oteg spoke with completely normal grammar and possessed tremendous wisdom and power. Unlike Vandar, Oteg took direct military action against the Sith. Oteg appears in the video game Star Wars: The Old Republic, where he learned through the Force ghost of Mitra Surik that a powerful Jedi had been held prisoner by the Sith Emperor for over 300 years. That prisoner was Revan himself, the redeemed Jedi who had destroyed the Star Forge centuries earlier. The Sith had captured him and kept him alive through the Force for 3 centuries of torment, and Oteg commanded the Republic fleet in an assault on the Maelstrom Prison, a secret Sith facility hidden in a deadly nebula, to free him. The attack succeeded, and Revan was freed, but victory came at a terrible cost. Grand Moff Rikus Kilran's Imperial Fifth Fleet ambushed Oteg's forces, trapping them between Imperial warships and the prison's defenses. Oteg ordered his fleet to buy time for the strike team completing the rescue mission inside the prison, knowing full well what it would cost him. In one possible outcome of the battle, Oteg's flagship was destroyed during the engagement, with the Jedi Master giving his life to ensure the mission's success. 2 members of Yoda's species had now given their lives in service to the Jedi. Vandar served on the Dantooine Enclave Council, while Oteg commanded Republic fleets. Both spoke normally, and both died confronting the Sith Empire. A pattern was emerging. These rare beings devoted themselves entirely to the light side of the Force, even when it cost them everything. But evidence suggests another member of this species may have served in an even darker time. The third recorded reference to a member of Yoda's species comes not from historical records, but from stone. In the Valley of the Jedi, on Ruusan, among the monuments commemorating the 7th Battle of Ruusan in 1000 BBY, stands a statue depicting a small figure with the unmistakable figures of Yoda's kind. The presence of this monument raises questions that have never fully been answered. The 7th Battle of Ruusan ended the 1,000-year conflict between the Jedi and the Brotherhood of Darkness. When Lord Khan faced certain defeat, he activated a thought bomb, a devastating force weapon that destroyed the souls of every Force user caught in its blast radius. Lord Hoth led 99 Jedi into the caves where Khan waited, sacrificing themselves to ensure no Sith escaped. The explosion killed them all, and their spirits were trapped in the Valley of the Jedi, imprisoned between life and death for 1,000 years. The statue's presence among these monuments suggests a member of Yoda's species served in that final battle, though whether they died alongside their fellow Jedi or somehow escaped the thought bomb's effects remains unknown. What we do know is that Yoda himself later possessed knowledge about the valley and its trapped spirits, and he shared this information with other Jedi, including Kuran. Centuries later, that knowledge became critical when the Dark Jedi Jarek sought to absorb the valley's power for himself. Kyle Katarn stopped him, but only because the valley's existence had been preserved in Jedi memory. The unnamed figure in stone stands as a silent testimony to a presence we may never fully understand, but the fourth confirmed member of this species left behind something far more tangible. The fourth member of this species created something that would shape galactic destiny. His name was Minch, and his story appears in Star Wars Tales Issue 16, a Legends comic titled Heart of Darkness. Unlike the previous members, Minch spoke with the same unusual grammar pattern that Yoda would later use, making this the first recorded instance of that distinctive speech style in any member of the species. Minch was a Jedi Knight, assigned by the Council to hunt Dark Jedi across the galaxy. In 700 BBY, he served under a Zabrak Jedi Master named Tadai on a mission to the Bafash system, where several Dark Jedi had been corrupting Force-sensitive individuals and turning them to darkness. When the Dark Jedi's leader fled toward the Outer Rim, the Jedi gave chase, and the pursuit led to a remote swamp world called Dagobah. Lightning struck Minch's ship as he entered the atmosphere, and the crash landing left him stranded on the planet's surface. Master Tadai ordered him to wait for extraction, but Minch ignored the command. Eager to prove himself, he pursued his target through the dense jungle vegetation until he found the Dark Jedi Master waiting at the entrance to a cave, and the enemy smiled at his arrival. The confrontation that followed would have lasting consequences. The Dark Jedi mocked Minch's small size, calling the young Jedi a child who was weak and full of fear and anger. Minch responded with fury, insisting he was not a child, and the Dark Jedi's smile widened because he had found exactly the weakness he was looking for. The Dark Jedi offered Minch a choice by summoning shadow warriors from the depths of the cave and telling the small Jedi to give in to the dark side, promising to show him what true power really meant. Minch refused, and the battle was joined. Using Force illusions, the Dark Jedi seemed to multiply into hundreds of smaller versions of himself, overwhelming Minch, and the young Jedi struck out desperately with his lightsaber. When Minch recovered, the Dark Jedi lay mortally wounded, but the enemy's final words proved to be a curse rather than a defeat. With his dying breath, the Dark Jedi proclaimed himself the victor, claiming Minch's mind was weak and open, written with fear and anger like a book for anyone to read. He predicted that Minch would one day make a great addition to the Dark Jedi, and then he died, his blood seeping into the cave floor. The narrator of the comic reveals the true significance of this battle. On that fateful day, on that remote planet, the balance of the Force changed forever. A new place of power was created, as the cave where Minch killed the Dark Jedi became saturated with dark side energy. The violence of that confrontation left a permanent stain on the Force. 700 years later, Luke Skywalker would enter that same cave during his training with Yoda. Inside, he would face a vision of Darth Vader, strike down the apparition with his lightsaber, and beneath the mask, he would discover his own face staring back at him. In Legends, the cave Minch created became a major dark-side nexus, though Canon acknowledges this location but does not identify him as its creator. Either way, it became one of the most important locations in Star Wars history. The very place that would one day test Luke Skywalker was born from a young Jedi's moment of anger 7 centuries earlier. But the 5th member of this species would spend 900 years trying to prevent exactly that kind of fall. The 5th member of this species is Yoda, who was born in 896 BBY, making him the oldest known member of his kind by a significant margin. He trained Jedi for over 800 years, and estimates suggest he taught approximately 20,000 students during his lifetime. He stood 66 centimeters tall and possessed abilities that made him one of the most powerful Force users in galactic history. In Legends, Yoda was considered a master of all lightsaber forms, and he could sense the future with remarkable clarity. He could deflect Force lightning with his bare hands and appear to others through the Force across vast distances. He learned to survive as a Force spirit after death, a secret taught to him by Qui-Gon Jinn, and he passed this knowledge to Obi-Wan Kenobi and eventually to Anakin Skywalker himself. In Legends continuity, the New Essential Chronology reveals that approximately 200 years before the Battle of Yavin, Yoda sensed something disturbing in the Force. The greatest Jedi Masters felt a murkiness, an uncertainty, a looming sense of dread pointing to the growing power of the dark side. Yoda developed a theory about this gathering darkness, believing it indicated the coming fulfillment of an ancient prophecy about a chosen one who would destroy the Sith forever. Yoda knew he was not that person, understanding that the dark side could only be fully defeated by someone more powerful than any Jedi in the Order's history. So, he would spend centuries waiting for that individual to appear. His greatest failure was also his greatest student. Count Dooku trained under Yoda and became what the Grand Master called the Order's greatest student and its greatest failure. Dooku possessed incredible talent and sharp intellect, but he also possessed pride, and that pride led him to question the Jedi way. Eventually, he left the Order entirely, and years later, he returned as a Sith Lord serving Darth Sidious. The Clone Wars transformed Yoda from teacher to general, and the change troubled him deeply. Both canon and legend sources show Yoda leading troops into battle while questioning whether the Jedi had lost their way. He commanded Republic forces at the First Battle of Geonosis, defended Kashyyyk alongside the Wookiees, earning the title Defender of the Home Tree, and led 3 clone troopers against hundreds of battle droids on the moon Rugosa, demonstrating that numbers meant nothing against wisdom and the Force. He assigned Anakin Skywalker a Padawan named Ahsoka Tano, hoping the experience would teach Anakin about attachment and loss. When the time came for Ahsoka to go her own way, Anakin would understand that he need not cling so tightly to those he loved. That was the plan, but none of it worked. When Order 66 came, Yoda felt thousands of Jedi die through the Force. He escaped execution on Kashyyyk and returned to Coruscant, where he discovered the horrifying truth about Anakin's fall. The Revenge of the Sith novelization by Matthew Stover describes Yoda examining the bodies at the Jedi Temple. He found Sindralig, the temple's lightsaber instructor, among the dead. Yoda had trained Dralig himself, and the grief was almost unbearable. But Yoda could not afford to grieve because 2 Sith Lords now controlled the galaxy, and Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi were among the only Jedi left who could challenge them. Together, they made a decision that would define the next 2 decades. Obi-Wan would face Anakin, now called Darth Vader, while Yoda would confront the Emperor himself. Yoda's duel with Darth Sidious in the Senate chamber revealed the terrible truth about the Jedi Order's failure. The novelization provides Yoda's thoughts during the battle, as the 2 most powerful Force users in the galaxy clashed with lightsabers first. Yoda, actually disarmed Sidious during their blade-to-blade combat, demonstrating his superior skill with a weapon. But Sidious had other tools at his disposal. The Emperor leaped to higher ground and began hurling Senate pods at Yoda with the Force. As massive platforms crashed around him, Yoda had a terrible realization. The Sith had evolved over 1,000 years, becoming masters of manipulation and deception, while the Jedi had spent those same centuries training to fight the last war, preparing for enemies who no longer existed. The Jedi had been fighting the wrong enemy the entire time, and Yoda understood that he had lost before he started. He had lost before he was born. The duel ended in a stalemate when Sidious unleashed Force lightning, and Yoda caught it with his bare hands, redirecting it back toward its source. An explosion of energy blasted both combatants apart. Sidious clung to a railing, while Yoda fell to the Senate floor far below. Clone troopers flooded the chamber, so Yoda escaped into a maintenance tunnel, cutting through conduits and walls to evade pursuit, while using the Force to sprint faster than any human could run. He dropped from the Senate building into the Coruscant night, using his cloak as an improvised airfoil to slow his descent. He fell directly into Bail Organa's waiting speeder, and when the senator asked if Yoda was wounded, the Grand Master admitted that only his pride had been hurt. Yoda's exile on Dagobah lasted 23 years, and he chose the planet deliberately. In Legends, the Darkside Cave that Minch had created 7 centuries earlier masked Yoda's presence in the Force. Recent canon material from the anthology From a Certain Point of View, Return of the Jedi, reveals something remarkable. Yoda's light side presence actually kept the dark cave in balance, his energy counteracting the darkness. When Yoda died, the dark side surged across the planet, spreading through the ecosystem like a shadow. During his exile, Yoda renewed his connection to the natural world. He meditated on how the Jedi had lost their way and prepared to train an apprentice who might become a new hope for the galaxy. His hut measured barely over a meter tall, built against an ancient gnarl tree using mud, rock, and bark, and he survived on a vegetarian diet of yarrow seeds, marsh fungi, gimmer bark, and root leaf soup. Yoda trained Luke Skywalker in the ways of the Force during his final years. He lifted Luke's crashed X-Wing using only the Force, demonstrating that size matters not, even though the ship weighed over 12,000 kilograms. He tested Luke in the Darkside Cave, where the young Jedi saw visions of Vader with Luke's own face beneath the mask. When Luke left Dagobah early to save his friends on Cloud City, Yoda feared he would lose another Skywalker to darkness. Luke returned years later to complete his training and found Yoda dying of old age at 900 years. The Ancient Master's final words carried the weight of centuries. He confirmed that Vader was truly Anakin Skywalker, Luke's father, and warned him about the Emperor's power and the seduction of the dark side. He declared that when he was gone, Luke would be the last of the Jedi. Yoda acknowledged that while he was strong with the Force, he was not strong enough to prevent his passing, recognizing that twilight was upon him and that this was simply the way of things and the way of the Force. His final instruction was simple: pass on what you have learned. The Force runs strong in your family. Then, with his last breath, he revealed there was another Skywalker, and his body faded into nothingness as he became one with the Force. The last Grand Master of the old Jedi Order had completed his journey, but one more member of his species had served alongside him on the Council, and her story had 2 very different endings. The 6th member of Yoda's species has 2 very different fates, depending on which continuity you follow. Yaddle was born around 509 BBY, making her roughly half Yoda's age. In Legends, she earned the title The One Below during one of the most harrowing experiences any Jedi ever survived. As a young Padawan, Yaddle accompanied her master, Pulvin Kut, on a mission to liberate the planet Koba from a warlord named Tulak. The mission went terribly wrong when Tulak's forces ambushed the Jedi over the Koban Gorge. Pulvin Kut let revenge affect his judgment because he had been tracking Tulak for decades after the warlord murdered his family. Surrounded by enemies, Kut left himself open for attack, and he was killed and beheaded, leaving his Padawan alone against dozens of fighters. Tulak captured Yaddle and imprisoned her in an underground chamber, subjecting her to torture and interrogation while demanding to know when more Jedi would arrive. Yaddle refused to break, telling Tulak that only his reign of terror would end. Eventually, Tulak grew tired of his failed attempts and left the planet, forgetting about his prisoner. The people of Koba continued sending food down the shaft as a ritual, barely remembering why, and Yaddle remained underground for over 100 years. Her imprisonment became her transformation. During those decades of isolation, Yaddle achieved complete unity with the Force by reliving her late master's lessons over and over until she understood them completely. She learned combat by fighting predators that wandered into her cave, using nothing but a wooden stick, and she became something the Jedi Order had never seen, a Padawan who trained herself to mastery through sheer will and connection to the Force. When an earthquake finally created an opening, Yaddle emerged to find Koba devastated by natural disasters. Rather than returning to the Jedi Temple, she stayed and helped the very people who had imprisoned her rebuild their society. She taught their children and brought hope to a world that had forgotten what hope felt like. When Tulak's son, Kalut, returned to claim the planet, Yaddle defeated him with the same wooden stick she had used for a century, and only then did she return to Coruscant. The Jedi Council faced an unusual situation. Yaddle had been a Padawan when she was captured, and she was still technically a Padawan over a century later. Yet she had achieved a mastery of the Force that rivaled anyone in the Order, and she had learned techniques the Council considered too dangerous to teach. Morichiro was one such technique, an ancient and forbidden Jedi combat art that allowed the user to rapidly slow a target's bodily functions to the point of death. The Council restricted it only to a handful of trusted masters, yet Yaddle had mastered it alone in her underground prison. Force Light was even rarer, an ability that followed a Jedi to purge dark side energy from a location or person. Yaddle was the only known Jedi of her time who could wield it, and her century of isolation had given her powers most Jedi would never achieve. The Council proposed elevating her directly to Jedi Master and granting her a seat on the Council itself. Only Yoda objected, citing the break from tradition, but after glimpsing her future in the Force, he relented. Yaddle joined the Council and went on to train dozens of Padawans, including Oppo Rancisis, who later joined her on the Council. In canon continuity, Yaddle's death comes at the hands of Count Dooku. The animated Tales of the Jedi shows Yaddle following Dooku after Qui-Gon Jinn's funeral in 32 BBY. She discovers him meeting with Darth Sidious in secret, finding proof that a Sith Lord controls the galaxy's politics. She could expose everything. Instead of attacking, Yaddle offers Dooku compassion, pleading with him to bring Sidious to justice and assuring him that whatever lies he had been told and whatever he had done, he could make up for it now. Dooku hesitates, and for a moment, redemption seems possible. Then, Sidious orders Dooku to prove his loyalty, and a lightsaber duel erupts. Yaddle fights bravely, matching Dooku's blade with her own, and she uses the Force to lift a massive hangar door that Dooku drops on her, demonstrating her considerable power. But Dooku's attack is relentless, and he strikes her down with his blade while Sidious watches approvingly. In her final moments, Yaddle condemns Dooku's twisted vision, pointing out how many had suffered for what he calls order. Her death completes Dooku's fall to the dark side, and he earns the name Darth Tyrannus. In Legends continuity, Yaddle passes away 6 years later in a very different way. She accompanies Obi-Wan Kenobi and his Padawan Anakin Skywalker on a mission to the planet Mawan in 26 BBY. Their goal is to restore peace to a lawless world, but a villain named Granta Omega has other plans. Omega releases a deadly bioweapon in the city of Natan, and thousands of innocent people will die. Yaddle makes the impossible choice by using the Force to absorb the entire chemical blast into her own body, drawing the deadly substance into herself like a great net woven from the Force. She saves the city, but dies instantly from the effort. Her final act is to speak telepathically to Anakin, encouraging him about his destiny as the Chosen One. Even in death, she was teaching, and even in death, she was thinking of others. One important detail distinguishes Yaddle from Yoda in canon. She speaks with normal grammar. The Tales of the Jedi episode shows Yaddle speaking standard basic without Yoda's distinctive syntax, confirming that Yoda's unusual speech pattern is a personal quirk rather than a trait of their species. Vandar, Oteg, and Yaddle all spoke normally, while only Minch and Yoda used the distinctive backward structure. But the seventh and final known member of this species would prove that their kind could forge entirely new paths. His name is Grogu, and he represents a bridge between two ancient traditions, a child who would ultimately choose family over the Jedi path. Grogu was born in 41 BBY, the same year as Anakin Skywalker. He trained at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant under multiple masters, and Ahsoka Tano later confirmed this during her meeting with him, revealing that he was raised at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, where many masters trained him over the years. He was 50 years old during the events of The Mandalorian, yet his species ages so slowly that he still appeared and behaved like a toddler. Grogu survived Order 66 through circumstances that remained mysterious for years. The Mandalorian Season 3 finally revealed the truth. When clone troopers stormed the Jedi Temple, several Jedi gave their lives defending Grogu by directing his pram into an elevator and shouting to get the youngling to Keller and Beck. A Jedi Master nicknamed the Sabered Hand, Beck was responsible for training younglings at the temple, and he fought through waves of clone troopers with dual lightsabers to reach Grogu. With help from Naboo allies, Beck escaped Coruscant on a Nubian yacht and delivered Grogu to safety. The child spent the following decades hidden, suppressing his Force abilities to avoid detection by the Empire. He buried his traumatic memories so deeply that even he could not access them, and Ahsoka sensed these dark gaps when she communed with him through the Force, finding that his memory became dark and that he seemed lost and alone. The decades in hiding left the young alien emotionally scarred, fearful, and hesitant to use his powers openly. In 9 ABY, Grogu's whereabouts had become known to the Imperial Remnant. Moff Gideon wanted the child's blood for cloning experiments because his high midichlorian count made him invaluable for research. A bounty was placed on Grogu's head, and a Mandalorian bounty hunter named Din Djarin accepted the contract. Djarin found Grogu on the planet Arvala 7 and initially intended to deliver the asset as contracted. When an assassin droid tried to terminate the child, Djarin made a different choice. He protected Grogu, brought the child aboard his ship, and began a journey that would change both their lives. Their travels across the galaxy revealed Grogu's incredible potential. He lifted a charging mudhorn beast using the Force, saving Djarin's life, but collapsing from exhaustion afterward. He healed mortal wounds with a touch, demonstrating a gift for Force healing that is extremely rare and seldom practiced in canon. And he created a protective Force barrier against an incinerator trooper's flames, saving everyone in the room. He also revealed darker instincts, and when he believed Djarin was being threatened during an arm wrestling match with their ally Cara Dune, Grogu Force choked her. Djarin had to physically stop him because the child's protective instincts could turn dangerous when fear took hold. The Mandalorian armorer declared Grogu a foundling and named Djarin his father under Mandalorian custom, calling them a clan of two. She also gave Djarin a quest: return the child to his own kind, or raise him as a Mandalorian. Ahsoka Tano sensed something troubling when she communed with Grogu through the Force, recognizing his species immediately since she had only known one other being like this, a wise Jedi Master named Yoda. She learned his name and his history at the Jedi Temple, and she also sensed his powerful attachment to Din Djarin, an attachment born of both love and fear. Ahsoka refused to train him, warning that his emotional bonds could lead him to the dark side. She had seen her own master fall to darkness, and she would not risk creating another. She directed them to Tython, an ancient Jedi world where Grogu could reach out through the Force to find another teacher. Luke Skywalker answered Grogu's call. The son of Anakin Skywalker arrived aboard Moff Gideon's cruiser, cutting through an army of dark troopers to rescue the child. In a moment that echoed across generations, Grogu left with Luke to train at his new Jedi Academy. For a time, it seemed Grogu would follow the traditional Jedi path. Luke found that teaching him was unique because it was more like Grogu was remembering than Luke was actually teaching him anything. Years of training already existed within Grogu, buried beneath trauma and fear, and Luke helped him recover those skills. He taught him to leap with the Force, to balance, to focus, and he used the Force to lift frogs, inspiring Grogu to lift one himself, though mainly because he wanted to eat it. But Luke also sensed conflict because Grogu missed Din Djarin. He gazed off into the distance, thinking of his Mandalorian father, and when Luke helped Grogu remember Order 66, the child relived the horror of watching Jedi fall to protect him. His attachment to Djarin made sense because the Mandalorian was the first person to protect him since that terrible night. Luke offered Grogu a choice with two items before him: Yoda's lightsaber and the Beskar chainmail Din Djarin had sent as a gift. Although earlier canon sources stated Yoda's lightsaber was destroyed during an Imperial ceremony, the Book of Boba Fett depicts Luke offering Grogu a green lightsaber identified as Yoda's. The lightsaber meant continuing Jedi training, while the armor meant returning to his Mandalorian family. Grogu could choose only one. Grogu chose Din Djarin. He returned to his father's side and has remained there ever since. In The Mandalorian Season 3, Grogu participates in Mandalorian combat training, uses the acrobatic skills Luke taught him to defeat a fellow foundling in a friendly match by executing 3 impressive flips before tagging his opponent. He saves Din from danger multiple times, demonstrating growing control over his abilities. And when Moff Gideon attacks the Mandalorian covert, Grogu creates a force barrier that shields Din and Bo-Katan Kryze from the explosion as the cruiser crashes. The season ends with Din Djarin formally adopting Grogu as his son. The armorer pronounces Grogu an apprentice of Clan Mudhorn, giving him the name Din Grogu. Because he cannot yet speak, he cannot take the full Mandalorian oath, but his place among the Mandalorians is secure. He will grow up following the way of the Mandalore while carrying the Force abilities trained by Luke Skywalker himself. The species of Yoda remains a mystery to this day, with no homeworld ever identified and no population beyond these 7 individuals ever recorded.
7 names across 4 millennia, and not one attached to a planet or even a species name. In Star Wars, that almost never happens, and background aliens with 3 seconds of screen time get homeworlds, biographies, and documented recording careers. Almost every alien in the Mos Eisley Cantina has a name. The bartender has a biography, the band has a homeworld, and a recording career that spans multiple reference books. A cone-headed alien who sits in the background for a few seconds has a full name, a planet of origin, and a documented history of salt addiction. But after 47 years, no one has been able to explain what Yoda is. 3 beings share a species across the entire canon timeline: Yoda, Yaddle, and Grogu. However, not one has ever been connected to a species name, a planet of origin, or a single recorded detail about where their kind comes from. Even the official Star Wars databank lists all 3 under the same 2-word classification: species unknown. The label is held for 47 years. Through 9 films, a television series, hundreds of novels and comics, through all of it is the same blank space. The absence is not an oversight, and it is not a gap waiting to be filled. It is a rule. Yaddle died on screen in the animated series Tales of the Jedi in 2022, killed by Count Dooku in a lightsaber duel that sealed his turn to the dark side. The episode gave her a dramatic end, but zero new information about what she was. She spoke standard galactic basic, with none of Yoda's famous inverted phrasing. Frank Oz, who has voiced Yoda since 1980, told Dave Filoni during production on Tales of the Jedi that the backward way of speaking was personal to Yoda, spoken in honor of his own master, rather than as a trait of the species. A detail like this hints at a lineage of teachers stretching back centuries, a chain of mentors within the species without anchoring it to a single name or location. In the old expanded universe, now classified as Legends, a handful of additional members surfaced over the years, and none carried a species designation either. A Jedi named Minch showed up in a 2003 Dark Horse comic called Heart of Darkness. A Jedi Master called Vandar Tokari served on the Dantooine Council in the Knights of the Old Republic video game. An unnamed member appeared in a 1998 novella. Fans started calling the group Tridactyls because of their three-fingered hands. Others guessed they might be the Wills, the mythic chroniclers behind the Journal of the Wills, a theory Lucasfilm later denied. The species has no name, and the reason for this traces back to the moment George Lucas invented it. When Lucas sat down to write The Empire Strikes Back, he had already killed off Obi-Wan Kenobi and needed a new physical mentor for Luke Skywalker. In a 2005 Moviephone Q&A alongside Hayden Christensen, he laid the process out in plain terms. He created a 2-foot-tall creature with green skin and large ears, and he never figured out where it came from or what its species was called. He described Yoda as a mysterious character, a magical figure with no background who comes and goes, a subversive and secret stranger who enters the story and exits without explanation. The character went through several early identities before landing on the version audiences recognize. In Lucas's first outline, the mentor figure carried the working name Buffy. Screenwriter Lee Brackett changed it to Minch Yoda in her first draft of the Empire screenplay, and later drafts dropped the first name entirely. At one point, Lucas considered having the role played by a trained monkey wearing a mask and carrying a cane, until a crew member who had worked on 2001: A Space Odyssey warned that the monkey would keep pulling the mask off. The production team had not settled on a physical method for bringing the character to life through much of development, and the deeper question of what Yoda was biologically never received an answer, because Lucas treated the absence as a feature of the character and not a gap. The character reads as something older than science fiction. The wise hermit who arrives from nowhere, the sage in the wilderness whose origins are part of his authority. Yoda fits that mold. Luke Skywalker landed on Dagobah expecting a great warrior and found a creature cooking stew in a mud hut. And the character worked precisely because nobody, not Luke and not the audience, could place him in any familiar frame. A backstory would have given him an edge. A species name would have made him easy to recognize. Lucas wanted the opposite. In the From Puppets to Pixels documentary on the Attack of the Clones DVD, he joked that Yoda was the illegitimate child of Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy, deflecting the question with humor the same way he had deflected it with silence for 20 years. He also had a cautionary example from his own work. When he introduced midichlorians in The Phantom Menace, giving the Force a measurable biological basis, the audience reaction was immediate and negative. Fans felt that measuring something spiritual had cheapened it, turning what felt like a cosmic mystery into something closer to a blood test. Whether that criticism was fair or not, the backlash made one thing clear: peel back the layers around something core to the emotional heart of Star Wars, and the magic thins. Yoda represented the Force at its most unknowable, and Lucas had no interest in over-explaining him the way many fans felt midichlorians had over-explained the Force. And the silence around the species carries a strange gravity of its own, because every scrap of evidence in the non-canon points towards something remarkable. Every known member of the species is deeply Force-sensitive, connected at a level no other species in the Star Wars universe comes close to matching. Yoda held the highest midichlorian count ever recorded until Anakin Skywalker came along. Grogu, at 50 years old and barely past infancy, can move objects with the Force, heal wounds, and fend off attackers in ways that take other beings decades of training to learn. Yaddle mastered Morocro, an ancient Jedi technique capable of slowing a living body's processes to the edge of death, a power so dangerous that almost no other Jedi in recorded history ever attempted it. A species built that way, with a natural connection to the Force running through every known member at every stage of life, opens storytelling doors that a name and a home world barely begin to cover. A planet home to such beings would look and feel nothing like the saga has shown so far. The living force might fill every surface the way it soaked Dagobah, the swamp world Yoda chose for his exile, where the line between nature and the mystical blurred in every direction. Their connection to the Force may even shape how they communicate, which could explain why Yoda's speech patterns differ so sharply from Yaddle's more conventional speech. And none of those ideas would require giving the species a name or pinning it to a map. The right story would deepen the void and not fill it, giving audiences who have never asked the question a reason to start. But the instinct to keep the species unknown would have stayed a private creative preference if Lucas had limited it to his own scripts. He did not. Before the prequel trilogy, Lucasfilm sent instructions to licensees across the publishing and merchandising divisions, actively discouraging any content that explored Yoda's species. The goal went past keeping a name secret. The company wanted to avoid confirming that an entire species of Yoda-like beings even existed. For all the audience knew through the original trilogy, Yoda could have been singular in the galaxy, and Lucasfilm preferred to keep it that way. When licensees crossed the line, the consequences were concrete. In 1994, Topps prepared a rare promotional card for its Star Wars Galaxy Series 2 trading card set, illustrated by John Reum, depicting a group of beings from Yoda's species gathered in a temple, kneeling before a large statue of one of their own, led in what looked like prayer by a figure resembling Yoda. Lucasfilm ordered Topps to recall and destroy the entire print run before a single card reached store shelves. Gary Girani, the author of the official Star Wars Topps trading cards book, confirmed in a 2019 Sci-Fi interview that the image had crossed the line with Lucasfilm. A handful of copies reportedly survived the recall, and in 2009, Topps reprinted the front artwork as a limited insert in Galaxy Series 4. But the original run was gone, pulped, because one illustration showed too much about a species that was never supposed to be depicted in groups, let alone at worship. When Lucas introduced Yaddle in The Phantom Menace in 1999, he confirmed for the first time that Yoda was not the only living member of the species. But the confirmation came wrapped in deliberate emptiness. Yaddle originated as a concept sketch by Ian McCaig, drawn as a possible design for a younger-looking Yoda, and Lucas liked the visual enough to have a puppet built and placed on the Jedi Council. Phil Easton puppeteered her on set. The credits named her, and a deleted scene gave her a few lines of dialogue, but Lucas cut those lines from the theatrical cut. The final film showed her sitting in her council seat with no speaking role, no backstory, and no lore of any kind. She vanished entirely from the following two prequels without explanation. In the Legends novels and comics, writers gave Yaddle a fairly detailed history, including centuries of imprisonment on a planet called Koba, but the canon treated her as a near absence, a face in the background of a council chamber. The Clone Wars ran for 6 seasons under Lucas's direct involvement and never touched the species or Yaddle's background, and production on the series discouraged exploring her character. The final arc of the series sent Yoda to the cosmic wellspring of the Force, a planet at the center of the galaxy where the living force and the cosmic force were one, the origin point of midichlorians, and then on to Moraband, the ancient home world of the Sith. He confronted the personification of his own dark side, resisted illusions crafted by Darth Sidious and Count Dooku through Sith sorcery, and learned the secret of preserving his consciousness after death. The 5 priestesses who guided him through those trials existed between life and death, manifestations of pure emotion who could appear at will and dissolve when their work was done, inhabiting a state no ordinary being could reach. Every known member of Yoda's species, with their extraordinary force sensitivity and their centuries-long lifespans, sits closer to that threshold than any other biological species in the canon. The connection is tantalizing, and it has never been drawn explicitly. A story exploring that connection would not need to name the species. It would only need to push further into the relationship between Yoda's kind and the Force itself. But the arc took Yoda deeper into the Force than any character in the canon has ever traveled, and it said nothing about his origins. Lucas worked on every stage of that arc's development, and the decision to leave the species untouched was his alone. When Lucasfilm changed hands in 2012, the silence around Yoda's species could have ended overnight. A name in a reference book, a line in a new show, a passing mention in any of the dozens of stories being developed for the new era. Instead, the first major addition to the species in decades arrived in 2019, and it answered nothing. Grogu was a 50-year-old infant of the same kind, found alone on a backwater planet, strong enough in the Force to lift a charging mudhorn and heal a poison wound, and completely without context. 3 seasons of The Mandalorian treated him as Yoda's mystery in miniature, the same species, the same extraordinary connection to the Force, and the same blank space where an origin story should be. Jon Favreau, who created the show, designed Grogu to sit inside that blank space. In interviews around The Mandalorian's launch, he said he believed the curiosity around the species came from the same deliberate secrecy Lucas had built around Yoda's origin, and that the secrecy naturally extended to Grogu. Dave Filoni, who worked alongside Lucas for years on the Clone Wars, has guarded the silence longer than anyone still telling stories in the galaxy. At Star Wars Celebration in 2023, a fan asked whether he held information about Grogu's family or species. Filoni responded that confirming whether he knew would only be cruel because the audience would then be aware he was choosing to withhold it, and he did not want to put anyone through that. When asked whether he ever intended to explore the question on screen, he said he did not think so. Pablo Hidalgo, Lucasfilm's lore advisor, has reinforced the boundary from a different angle, personally shutting down the long-running fan theory that the species might be the Whills, the mythic chroniclers of the Journal of the Whills. The species remains classified as unknown in the official databank and every public-facing reference to date. Grogu has not spoken a word across 3 seasons of television, a spin-off appearance in the Book of Boba Fett, and most recently in the newly released theatrical film The Mandalorian and Grogu, the most powerful young Force user in the current fiction, and no one has ever let him name what he is. The same held true inside the stories. Grogu used the Force on screen dozens of times, healed mortal wounds, deflected fire, levitated creatures, and created a Force shield strong enough to hold back an explosion that killed Moff Gideon. At no point did any character comment on what kind of being could do those things at that age, or where such a being might come from. The fiction treated the question as invisible, and the audience accepted it, because the character's power felt more impressive without an explanation than it would have with one. Yoda works as a character because he occupies a space no other figure in the Star Wars galaxy fills. Every other major species in the universe carries a weight of context. A Twi'lek comes with Ryloth, a political history, an economy shaped by exploitation and trade. A Mandalorian comes with armor traditions, warrior codes, leadership disputes, and centuries of conflict with the Jedi. Species identity in Star Wars is never neutral. It arrives loaded with detail, and detail defines the limits of what a character can represent. Yoda has none of that, and the blankness is not an accident. He carries no cultural weight, no political ties rooted in a home world, no ties to his ancestors. He can serve as a pure vessel for the Force's wisdom because nothing about his background competes with that role. A named species would hand future writers a home world to visit, a government to depict, a language to translate, and a history to reconcile with the existing timeline. Each edition would sharpen the picture and inevitably shrink it. A similar logic protects the deep nature of the Force, which Star Wars has left deliberately vague even as it explores the Force's effects in detail after detail across every era of fiction. The Force and the species share the same purpose. They are the 2 great unknowns in the galaxy, and both draw their weight from the space left around them. Star Wars has tested the limits of revelation before, and the results have not always been kind. Midichlorians turned the Force from a spiritual presence into something that could be measured with a needle. Boba Fett spent 2 decades as the galaxy's most feared bounty hunter, partly because audiences never saw behind the helmet. The prequels recast him as a child clone of Jango Fett, and the mystique that had fueled fan fascination for a generation evaporated in a handful of scenes. Snoke arrived in the sequel trilogy as a towering dark-side figure whose origin the filmmakers position as the anchor of the new era's conflict, and the answer? A vat of engineered clones in a Sith laboratory landed with a flatness that made the question feel cheaper than the mystery had. Some secrets in Star Wars thrive on revelation. Yoda's species sits in the rarer category, where the blank space contributes more to the story than any answer plausibly could. The question has gone unanswered for close to 50 years, and with good reason. But a version of the story is waiting to be told, one where the right kind of content expands the mystery without solving it, and the raw material is sitting in the canon, unused. Three beings across 47 years of fiction, each among the most powerful Force users ever recorded, each carrying the same blank entry in the databank. A Force wellspring at the heart of the galaxy that Yoda visited, whose connection to his species was never addressed. A pattern of Force sensitivity so consistent, it cannot be coincidence, running through every known member at every stage of life, from Grogu's infancy to Yoda's final hours on Dagobah. And the Clone Wars and The Mandalorian have both proven that audiences will follow stories about the Force into strange and unfamiliar territory when the writing earns their trust. A series or film that took Grogu into the edges of the known galaxy, tracing remnants of his kind through ruins older than the Republic, would not need to break the commitment Lucas made. It would need to honor the spirit behind it while recognizing that a mystery left completely untouched for half a century risks becoming something audiences accept and not wonder about. The best mysteries grow when they are fed carefully, and the difference between explaining it away and deepening it is a question of craft, not of caution. A home world that resists easy description, a culture that communicates through something older than language, a connection to the Force that came before the Jedi Order by thousands of years. None of those ideas requires a species name or a databank entry. They require a story willing to stand at the edge of the void and look in without filling it. Whether that story will ever be told is a question the fiction has not answered. 47 years of Star Wars have produced three members of the species, each among the most powerful Force users in the canon, and not one has been given a name for what they are. Grogu remains silent, the databank remains blank, and the connection between the species and the oldest layers of the Force, hinted at through every piece of evidence the fiction has offered, remains unexplored. But a locked door and an empty room are two different things, and everything the canon has recorded about the beings behind that door, their power, their rarity, and their connection to the deepest currents of the Force, says the room is anything but empty. That silence has never been explained, and neither has the thing sitting underneath it. Nobody has worked out why these beings hold when almost everyone else with that much power eventually breaks. The answer may have less to do with the Force than with how they grow up.
The real reason Yoda's species is so powerful isn't just their strength in the Force. It's something far more mysterious. Throughout thousands of years in galactic history, across countless wars, betrayals, and temptations, every known member of their species has remained loyal to the light side. Humans produced both Luke Skywalker and Emperor Palpatine. Zabraks gave the galaxy Jedi Masters and Darth Maul. Twi'leks became Jedi Knights and Sith Assassins. Every other Force-sensitive species spawned both heroes and villains, except one. This pattern becomes impossible to ignore when you examine the evidence. In canon, only three members are known: Yoda, Yaddle, and Grogu. All three serve the light side. In Legends, three more appear over a millennium: Vandar Tokar, Master Oteg, and Minch. 6 distinct individuals spanning thousands of years. Not one has been shown turning to the dark side in any official story. So why has this species never produced a Sith Lord? The answer lies in examining each member's story. Let's start with the most famous, Yoda himself. Canon describes him as small, just 0.66 meters tall, with green skin and large pointed ears. Yet it also describes him as stronger than most Jedi in his connection with the Force. For over 800 years, he trained Jedi at the Coruscant Temple, shaping the Order's philosophy and preparing thousands of students. Yoda faced temptations that would have broken almost any other Jedi. He watched the Republic crumble into corruption. He saw political leaders ignore warnings about threats. Even the Jedi Master experienced the pain of betrayal when his own Padawan, Count Dooku, became Darth Tyrannus and helped orchestrate the Clone Wars. The weight of these failures should have crushed him. Most Jedi who lose even one student to darkness question their entire philosophy. However, Yoda never developed distrust or bitterness that such losses typically create. The Order he'd served for centuries fell in a single night during Order 66. But the true test of Yoda's resistance to darkness happened inside his own mind. Canon detailed Yoda's ultimate internal test at the wellspring of life. The Force priestesses, ancient beings who existed since the Force first divided into light and dark, made him confront truths most beings wouldn't survive knowing. They showed him that the Jedi would fall and that the Sith would rule the galaxy. Then came the worst trial, confronting a shadow version of himself that embodied all his capacity for evil. This wasn't an external army, but part of Yoda himself. Every dark thought he'd ever suppressed, every moment of anger he'd ever felt, every temptation he'd ever resisted, given form and voice. The shadow showed him how his power and wisdom could have made him the ultimate Sith Lord. Most Jedi who face such trials either fall completely or barely survive with sanity intact. By the end, Yoda acknowledged the darkness by speaking to it directly. He accepted its existence but demonstrated that it could never control him. Yet his greatest test came when he faced Emperor Palpatine for the fate of the galaxy. In the Senate chamber, Yoda deflected Palpatine's Force lightning and fought him to a standstill. The duel ended with neither achieving victory. But what matters is that Yoda maintained perfect balance even as the fate of the entire galaxy was at stake. After the duel, Yoda made a choice that reveals something important about his nature. He retreated. To many Jedi, that might have seemed like failure. Yet Yoda understands a deeper truth. A heroic death would accomplish nothing. The Sith would still rule, and without him, there would be no one to train the next generation of hope. He went into exile on Dagobah, a remote, force-rich swamp planet. Within its depths lay the Cave of Evil, a site strongly attuned to the dark side. Yoda chose to live nearby, his presence hidden by the cave's dark energy, but untouched by its corruption. For 20 years, he lived there contemplating the failures of the Jedi and preparing for what would come next. He could have spent that time plotting revenge. Instead, he waited for what the Force would provide. When Luke Skywalker finally arrived, Yoda taught him lessons that would only come from 9 centuries of experience. He began not with lightsaber combat or Force techniques, but with philosophy and perspective. His famous teachings about size not mattering and the dark side being quicker and more seductive weren't just advice. They were truths he'd proven across his entire life. He understood that Luke's preconceptions about power would lead him toward darkness just as they had with Anakin. Maybe Yoda's resistance came from wisdom accumulated over centuries. But what would happen if you took someone from Yoda's species who doesn't have that experience and wisdom? Grogu provides a crucial test case, the youngest known member of Yoda's species at 50 years old. He was a student at the Coruscant Jedi Temple who survived Order 66 and was hidden away for many years. He finally appeared during the era of The Mandalorian. Order 66 should have broken him as a child. Grogu watched clone troopers, his protectors since birth, systematically murder his teachers and fellow students. The temple where he learned to walk, where he played and trained, became a slaughterhouse. Like other survivors of the Jedi Purge, Grogu soon learned that hiding was not enough. It was not until the New Republic era that Imperial remnants under Moff Gideon hunted him specifically for blood experiments. They didn't see him as a sentient being, but as a resource to harvest. That level of sustained trauma could have corrupted him just like many surviving Jedi who turned to darkness after Order 66. His feats on The Mandalorian told a different story than expected. When his powers reawakened, he displayed remarkable abilities with the Force. He didn't lash out with rage when faced with a charging mudhorn that threatened Din Djarin. Instead, he lifted the creature carefully, precisely, just long enough for his protector to find an opening. In another instance, he proved that he had compassion for friends and foes alike. When Greef Karga lay dying from poison, Grogu channeled pure energy to save him. This was the same bounty hunter who'd hunted him for profit. Yet Grogu showed no hesitation, no calculation about whether this person deserved help. He simply healed. But Grogu wasn't without struggle. His only moment approaching darkness came during a friendly arm wrestling match between Djarin and Cara Dune. Grogu used a Force choke reflexively out of fear, not malice. This ability is traditionally associated with the dark side. The scene demonstrates he's capable of using aggressive Force abilities when protecting those he cares about. When Ahsoka Tano tested him, she sensed his fear, his anger, and his attachment to Din Djarin. These are precisely the emotions that the Jedi Code warns against, the feelings that traditionally birth Sith Lords. Ahsoka warned Djarin that Grogu would need careful training due to these attachments and emotions. Additionally, she sensed something deeper. Her line about him being a good boy implies she perceived nobility alongside fear. What's notable isn't that Grogu can't feel dark emotions, it's that despite feeling them, despite having every reason to fall, he consistently chooses protection and healing over destruction. At 50 years old, still essentially an infant by his species' standards, Grogu has already endured traumas that turned others to the dark side. Canon doesn't claim he's magically immune. In fact, Ahsoka explicitly warns that his fear and attachment are dangerous, the very emotions that lead to the dark side. It shows him struggling with the same temptations as others. The difference lies in how he responds. If trauma couldn't corrupt a child, what about the ultimate betrayal of trust? In canon around 32 BBY, Yaddle, another member of Yoda's species, experienced such betrayal. This female master, who served on the Council in the final decades of the Republic, uncovered Count Dooku's fall to the dark side before anyone else suspected. She'd known Dooku for centuries. They'd meditated together, trained students together, and debated philosophy together. The betrayal should have felt deeply personal. She faced a choice that had destroyed countless Jedi throughout history: expose the traitor immediately or attempt redemption through compassion. The smart move would have been immediate action. Alert the Council, mobilize the Temple Guard, treat Dooku as the enemy he'd become. The danger was absolute. Dooku had already begun working with Darth Sidious. One wrong move meant death. Most Jedi would have attacked first, seeing only a Sith threat that needed elimination. Instead, Yaddle approached him with genuine compassion. She believed even someone acutely falling could be saved through understanding rather than force. When Dooku murdered her, she died without hatred. Before dying, she warned Dooku, telling him the Council was wrong about certain things, but that his path led nowhere good. This pattern of unwavering loyalty to the light extends even further back into galactic history. In Legends, Vandar Tokar served as a Jedi Master around 4000 BBY during the Mandalorian Wars. He led the Jedi Enclave on Dantooine, appearing prominently in Knights of the Old Republic. When planets burned and young Jedi like Revan and Malak defied Council orders to join the fight, Vandar counseled patience. The pressure to act must have been overwhelming. Every day of delay meant more deaths, more worlds conquered. Republic media painted the Council as cowards. Young Jedi looked at masters like Vandar with barely concealed contempt, seeing his caution as weakness. But Vandar taught patience for a reason. He understood that acting without full information often made things worse. Jedi who rushed into war without caution became vulnerable to the dark side, as seen in the rise of Darth Revan and Darth Malak. In contrast, those who listened to his advice remained on the light side. Around 3951 BBY, Legends sources describe Vandar's death at Katar's conclave when Darth Nihilus arrived. Nihilus was something far worse than a typical Sith Lord. He was a wound in the Force itself, a being of pure hunger that consumed all life on planets. Most beings died instantly when Nihilus fed, their life force ripped away in seconds. According to those accounts, Vandar lasted long enough to help others escape, creating force barriers that bought precious moments. His final thoughts focused on protecting others, maintaining his connection to the light, even as darkness literally consumed him. Around the same era, another member demonstrated something equally remarkable. Master Oteg served as both Jedi Master and Republic Fleet Admiral during the Great Galactic War and subsequent Cold War, around 3643 BBY. He commanded Republic forces against a Sith Empire that showed no mercy. Along with Vandar Tokar, he is one of the few known members of Yoda's species to speak in standard grammar. Unlike Yoda and Yaddle, he doesn't twist words in the distinctive syntax his species is known for. Despite this, his Force sensibilities and unwavering commitment to the light side remained identical. The Sith of that era conducted orbital bombardments that destroyed entire civilian populations. They used biological weapons and terror tactics that violated every treaty and convention. The temptation to respond with equal brutality must have been overwhelming. Oteg's own officers begged him to authorize strikes against Sith civilian targets. They presented compelling arguments. A shorter war would mean fewer total deaths. Matching enemy tactics seemed the only path to victory, and the Sith had started the brutality. Still, Oteg refused to target non-combatants, even when it cost him battles he could have won. He prioritized minimizing casualties over quick victories. For him, the Jedi needed to prove they were better than the Sith. He led by example, never asking his troops to maintain standards he wouldn't uphold himself. This species responds to concentrated darkness. Around 700 BBY, Dark Jedi terrorized the Bafash system, slaughtering innocents across multiple worlds. These weren't military targets, but farming colonies, mining outposts, families who'd never held weapons. Minch, a young knight of Yoda's species barely past his 100th year, pursued one of these Dark Jedi to a remote planet. His fellow Jedi tried to stop him, believing the pursuit was too dangerous. But Minch insisted, placing complete faith in the Force to guide him. The planet was Dagobah, the very same location where Yoda would later hide. The battle between Minch and the Dark Jedi was so intense that it permanently scarred the location. The dark energies released during their duel created what would later become the Cave of Evil that Luke Skywalker entered centuries later. That's the level of corruption Minch faced. Concentrated evil so intense, it literally affected the planet itself. According to legends, he was emotionally destabilized and narrowly avoided falling to the dark side. Drawing on light side reserves that seemed beyond what someone so young should possess, he pulled himself back and defeated the Dark Jedi. When the mission ended, he claimed no glory. He simply marked the assignment complete, noted the location's danger, and moved to his next task. This humility after such a victory shows a pattern. They don't boast about resisting darkness. They simply do it and move forward. So what makes them different? While Canon and Legends never explicitly explain this, we can observe certain patterns in their biology and behavior. The key starts with their developmental timeline. At 50 years old, Grogu was still essentially an infant. Although his mind was developing, his emotional and physical development moved at a completely different pace. Think about what this means for Force development. Human Force sensitivities begin facing moral complexities by age 15. They experience jealousy over peers' achievements, ambition for personal advancement, fear of failure and loss. All these emotions can feed the dark side while they're still learning to channel the Force. Yoda's species spends approximately 50 years in childhood, 5 entire decades, where their developing minds absorb Force energy while experiencing childhood emotions rather than adult corruption. During this time, they sense the Force, feel it flowing through all living things, and even manipulate it instinctively, but they experience emotions through a child's framework. When scared, they seek comfort rather than plotting revenge. When frustrated, they might act out momentarily like Grogu, but it comes from protective instinct rather than hatred. When attached, they love without trying to possess or control. By the time they reach full maturity around 100 years old, they've spent decades with these patterns established. The databank confirms Yoda lived roughly 900 years and trained Jedi for over 8 centuries. This formative period represented only about 5 to 6% of his total life. He spent 50 years building light-side foundations, then over 800 years reinforcing them through experience. Compare this to other species. Humans maybe spend 10 to 15 years in relative innocence, then 60 to 80 years facing temptation. Their formative period represents 15 to 20% of their total life, happening when they're emotionally vulnerable. But extended childhood alone doesn't fully explain their consistency. Their extreme rarity adds another dimension. In both canon and legends, their homeworld and species name remain officially unknown. George Lucas intentionally kept this information secret, and Lucasfilm maintains that mystery to this day. With only a handful of members appearing across thousands of years of galactic history, each one becomes precious beyond measure. This isn't random. It suggests something unique about their origins, though official sources never explain what. Some fans theorize their homeworld might be a light-side nexus, similar to how Korriban radiates darkness, or how Mortis existed as a Force convergence. Beings evolved in such an environment might possess Force energy differently at the cellular level. However, no official canon or legend source confirms this theory. Others suggest they appear when the galaxy needs them most. Tracking their historical appearances shows an interesting pattern. Yoda and Yaddle emerged during the Republic's final centuries, precisely when the Sith were implementing their grand plan. Vandar and Oteg appeared during desperate Sith wars, while Grogu emerged during the New Republic's formation. Each appearance comes when the galaxy faces a crisis of light versus dark. But again, this is observation, not official explanation. Canon and Legends simply present the facts without commentary on deeper meaning. What official sources do show is how they process emotions differently than most Force users. When Grogu experiences fear, he seeks safety rather than lashing out. His fear doesn't transform into anger at threats. When attached to his protector, Din Djarin, he chooses love over possession. He wants to be with him, but doesn't try to control him. Even when he does use aggressive Force abilities, like choking Cara Dune, it's momentary and protective. This pattern exists in Yoda as well. After 8 centuries of teaching, he never developed cynicism. He trained thousands of Jedi over his lifetime. Statistically, many died in combat. Hundreds fell to darkness. Some betrayed everything he taught them. Yoda carried the weight of every mistake, every failure, every lost student. Yet each new youngling received the same patience and dedication. Yoda confronted his own capacity for evil directly. The fact that he could acknowledge darkness within himself while maintaining that it would never control him shows remarkable self-awareness. He didn't suppress or deny the darkness. He accepted its existence as part of being alive, then chose light anyway. On Dagobah, surrounded by a concentrated dark side presence for 20 years, Yoda could have given in to despair. He could have spent that time in anger at the Council's failures. He could have lost faith in the Jedi way after watching everything fall apart. Instead, he maintained hope, knowing the Force would provide another chance. In Legends, Yaddle's sacrifice demonstrated the same pattern of choosing light even unto death. When she confronted Dooku, knowing he'd fallen, she could have attacked immediately out of anger at his betrayal. Instead, she approached with compassion, believing even someone actively falling could be saved through understanding. Vandar showed similar dedication in Legends. Despite pressure from young, aggressive Jedi who saw his caution as weakness, he maintained his position based on wisdom and foresight. Oteg demonstrated it through military command. Although he had the authority to order devastating strikes that might shorten the war, he refused to compromise Jedi principles by targeting civilians. He proved that maintaining honor wasn't weakness, but strength. And young Minch in Legends showed that even members barely past childhood exhibited this trait. Facing a dark Jedi on Dagobah in a battle so intense it permanently scarred the location, Minch drew on light side reserves to prevail. Then, he simply reported the mission complete and moved on, claiming no glory. The battle created the cave, but Minch walked away without corruption. 6 individuals, all facing circumstances that historically create Sith Lords. Yet in every official story, canon or legends, each one maintained their connection to the light. Official sources never explain why this is. The mystery of Yoda's species may never be solved. George Lucas ensured these beings would remain enigmatic. Their homeworld stays classified. Even their species' name remains secret. This might be intentional. In a galaxy that demands explanations for everything, that finds scientific reasons for every phenomenon, Yoda's species reminds us that some wonders should remain wonderful. They are the Force's greatest mystery. What they prove is that unwavering dedication to the light side is possible. They show that wisdom can be accumulated without cynicism, that power can be wielded without corruption, that some beings, through whatever combination of biology, culture, and choice, remain anchored to the light across centuries of temptation. Every member represents a living example of Jedi ideals at their purest. They face darkness, acknowledge it, understand it, and still choose light. Not one shown falling. That's not a coincidence, but rather a pattern worth examining. They prove the Jedi philosophy isn't naive idealism, but an achievable truth. That compassion, patience, and wisdom aren't limitations, but advantages. That the light side, though harder to master and maintain, leads to something genuine and lasting. No official source claims they're biologically incapable of falling. They face the same temptations as others: fear, anger, attachment, loss, betrayal. The difference is in how they respond. This consistency across individuals, eras, and circumstances is what makes them truly powerful. Not just their strength in the Force, though official sources confirm they possess that. Not just their longevity, though living for centuries provides advantages. Not just their wisdom, though experience shapes understanding. What makes them powerful is their example. They demonstrate that the light side isn't a limitation. Choosing compassion over vengeance, patience over aggression, and service over domination doesn't make you weak. It makes you unbreakable. That's the real mystery of Yoda's species. In a galaxy where every other Force-sensitive species has produced both villains and heroes, this one species has produced only Jedi. And perhaps that's exactly how it should remain. A mystery that inspires, rather than a puzzle to be solved.
Nobody has ever explained a record that clean, and the one being best placed to try spent 800 years refusing to. Yoda sat at the top of an order that wrote down where every last Jedi came from. His own entry is the one left blank.
The mystery of Yoda's hidden homeworld isn't speculation, but a documented fact. According to the canon reference book Star Wars: The Complete Visual Dictionary, New Edition, the Grand Master of the Jedi Order actively kept his homeworld a secret. Similarly, the Legends source The Essential Guide to the Force confirms that Yoda never revealed his homeworld throughout his entire tenure with the Jedi. For over 800 years, the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy refused to reveal where he came from, and yet no one in the Order ever questioned why. Using both canon and legend sources, we'll examine 5 key pieces of evidence that reveal not just how Yoda kept his origins hidden, but why he may have done so. The first proof of Yoda's secrecy comes from the Jedi archives themselves. Every Jedi who joined the Order had their homeworld recorded in their official file. This was standard procedure, documented across multiple sources. The archives maintain comprehensive records on thousands of Jedi across generations, cataloging species, origins, and backgrounds as part of their institutional memory. From youngling to Padawan to Knight, every Jedi's file included their planet of origin, and the system was designed to be complete. Yet when you search for Yoda's entry, the homeworld field is blank. In every official reference book that catalogs Jedi and their backgrounds, Yoda's species is listed simply as unknown, and his homeworld receives that same designation. This isn't an oversight or a gap in the records, as the Jedi archives were meticulous and obsessively complete. Jocasta Nu, the chief librarian, famously declared in Attack of the Clones that if something didn't appear in the archives, it simply didn't exist, and she spoke with absolute confidence in the system's completeness. Yoda's blank entry becomes even more striking considering his position. The Grand Master sat on the Jedi Council for centuries, trained thousands of Jedi, and was arguably the most documented individual in the entire Order's history, with records of his teachings, his missions, and his guidance spanning 800 years. The absence of Yoda's homeworld in a system designed to record every Jedi's origins points to only one conclusion: intentional omission. Someone with the authority and access to manipulate those records ensured that information never appeared, or was quietly removed long before anyone alive would ever remember it existed. And given Yoda's position at the very top of the Jedi hierarchy, he would have had both the authority and the opportunity to make that happen. The second piece of evidence goes beyond hiding information. In Legends continuity, he actively exploited the archive's vulnerabilities for his own protection. According to Revenge of the Sith, the visual dictionary, Dagobah was among the planets erased from the Jedi archives. In Legends sources, Yoda discovered that 38 worlds had been deleted from the archive database, their entries completely scrubbed from the system. When he needed a place to hide after Order 66, when the clones turned on the Jedi and the Empire rose to power, he chose Dagobah specifically because it was a non-existent planet. The Grand Master didn't stumble onto some random swamp world by accident or flee blindly into the Outer Rim hoping to avoid detection. He selected a location that had already been scrubbed from official records, a planet that, according to Jocasta Nu's own logic, did not exist. He used the very system of institutional concealment that someone else had created for his own protection. This reveals something crucial about Yoda's understanding of secrecy. The precedent for this kind of erasure was established clearly in Attack of the Clones. When Obi-Wan searched for the ocean world Kamino, He found nothing. The gravitational readings indicated a planet should exist in that location. The stars were being pulled by something massive, but the archives showed empty space where Kamino should have been. Obi-Wan brought this anomaly to Yoda, expecting surprise or concern. Instead, Yoda's response was measured, almost casual. He simply observed that someone had erased the information, as if this were a known possibility rather than an unthinkable violation. His familiarity with archive tampering suggests this wasn't the first time he'd encountered it, or perhaps not the first time he'd used it himself. The implications are significant. If Yoda understood how to erase information from the archives, if he knew that planets could simply vanish from official records, then he also knew how to make his own homeworld disappear. The same techniques that Dooku used to hide Kamino could have been applied centuries earlier to hide a far more important secret. Yoda had centuries of access to the archives, the authority of the Grand Master, and relationships with every chief librarian who served during his tenure. If he wanted information to vanish, he had the means to make it happen. The question is, why would the Grand Master go to such lengths to hide where he came from? Frank Oz, who originated the role of Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back, preserved notes from the character's creation that offer a rare glimpse into his backstory. According to Oz's original 1980 production notes, Yoda came from a gentler world. That detail has never been expanded upon in any official source, as the world was never named and its location was never hinted at. But the description itself is significant. A gentler world suggests a place of peace, perhaps a civilization that chose isolation over galactic involvement, a people who preferred quiet existence over the conflicts that define most of galactic history. If Yoda's people intentionally separated themselves from galactic society, revealing their location could expose them to dangers they had spent generations avoiding. Species that could not defend themselves were often conquered, enslaved, or absorbed into larger powers. But Yoda's species wouldn't be vulnerable. They would be something far more dangerous to reveal: valuable. The third piece of evidence comes from a pattern that spans centuries. Only 3 members of his species have ever appeared in Star Wars canon: Yoda, Yaddle, and Grogu. All 3 were connected to the Jedi Order. Yoda served as Grand Master for centuries, the highest position in the entire Jedi hierarchy. Yaddle held a seat on the High Council during the final years of the Republic. Grogu was a Temple youngling who survived Order 66 and was later discovered by Din Djarin. Every known member of this species possessed extraordinary force sensitivity, not just moderate talent or above-average potential, but extraordinary power that manifested from their earliest years. Grogu, despite being developmentally equivalent to a toddler, could lift massive creatures with the Force, heal mortal wounds, and even use abilities that full Jedi Masters struggled to perform. In The Mandalorian, he demonstrated Force powers that shocked everyone who witnessed them, from lifting a mudhorn to choking enemies to healing fatal injuries. Similarly, Yaddle was powerful enough to earn a council seat and serve alongside Yoda during the final decades of the Republic. And Yoda himself was considered the greatest Jedi of his era, possibly the greatest in the Order's entire history, capable of dueling Sith Lords and lifting starfighters with apparent ease. And not one of them has ever spoken publicly about their origins. This consistency across 3 individuals, spanning centuries, suggests either a cultural prohibition against discussing their homeworld or deliberate coordination to protect it. 3 beings, separated by hundreds of years, all maintaining the same silence about the same subject, is not a coincidence, but policy. The fourth piece of evidence of Yoda's secrecy comes from what happened when others tried to reveal information about his species. George Lucas established strict rules about Yoda's origins that extended across all Star Wars media. In a 2005 Moviefone interview, Lucas explained that he never developed a backstory for Yoda, deliberately keeping the character a mystery with no background, no species name, and no homeworld. Lucas's approach became official Lucasfilm policy and actively discouraged anyone in the expanded universe from exploring Yoda's backstory, his species, or his origins. Writers who wanted to develop stories about his background were told this territory was off limits. The most striking example involved a trading card that depicted a group of beings resembling Yoda gathered around an altar with a statue of their kind. The image showed what appeared to be a religious or cultural ritual, with 5 members of the species in various poses of reverence or meditation. One figure appeared to levitate, radiating power while the others watched. It was the first and only glimpse of Yoda's species as a society rather than isolated individuals. For a brief moment, fans might have learned something about how his people lived, what they believed, how they related to each other. Lucasfilm pulped the entire print run. The cards were recalled and destroyed before fans ever knew they existed. Whatever information that image might have revealed, whatever context it might have provided, was intentionally erased from the official record. No other species in Star Wars history has been protected with such extreme measures. Wookiees have documented homeworlds, detailed cultural histories, named leaders, and significant historical events. Twi'leks have entire story arcs devoted to their planet and their struggles. Even the most mysterious species in the galaxy have some canonical information available for fans who want to learn more. But Yoda's kind remains hidden by intentional, active enforcement. Every time someone has tried to reveal details about Yoda's origins, Lucasfilm has intervened to stop it. The 5th and final piece of evidence comes from Dave Filoni, who worked alongside Lucas for years on the Clone Wars and maintains this tradition to this day. In interviews, Filoni has stated directly that he knows backstories about Yoda's species, details that have never been revealed publicly, as Filoni has confirmed that actual information exists, including stories and context that could answer questions fans have been asking for over 4 decades. But he considers it not his story to tell. He respects Lucas's original vision for the character's mystique and refuses to break that trust, even when fans press him for answers, even when revealing those details might generate enormous interest and publicity. This is crucial because the information actually exists, as Filoni has confirmed, but it remains locked away, protected at the highest levels of Lucasfilm's creative leadership. When asked about whether fans would ever see Yoda's home planet, Filoni responded that revealing it would mean a large part of the fun goes right out the window. He treats the mystery itself as essential to the character, as fundamental to who Yoda is as his green skin or his distinctive speech patterns.
Yoda was right to bother hiding them, and the proof came long after he was gone. The one time the galaxy got its hands on a member of his species, nobody asked where the child came from or what he knew. They asked what could be taken out of him. In 900 years of galactic history, only 3 members of this kind have ever been confirmed, and the silence surrounding every one of them feels anything but accidental. Yoda, Yaddle, and Grogu make up the entire known population across all of Star Wars canon, with no name for what they are, no home world, and no record of where they come from or how many might still exist. 3 beings scattered across 9 centuries, a silence so complete it feels deliberate, and a growth cycle so slow that even if hundreds more exist on some uncharted world, a single generation lost cannot be replaced in any timeline that matters. The galaxy has already shown what it does when it finds one of them. It does not protect them, it does not study them from a distance, it takes what it needs and moves on. Canon sources have preserved enough of the story to answer the questions the Order spent centuries avoiding, drawn from the films, the series, the novels, and the comics. Both Canon and Legends material were examined to put this together, though the foundation here rests on what the current canon has confirmed. Chapter 1: The Broken Record. Every official file on Yoda, Yaddle, and Grogu carries the same word, and that word has already been proven meaningless. Every Star Wars reference that addresses them carries the same designation: unknown. Yaddle's home world is likewise listed as unknown. In all the decades since Yoda first appeared on screen in The Empire Strikes Back, no source has ever given his kind a name. Behind the scenes, the mystery has been treated as a deliberate creative decision from the very beginning. George Lucas kept the information locked down from the start, and Dave Filoni maintained that stance during the production of the Clone Wars, stating in interviews that he believed the home world would never actually be shown in any Star Wars story. Whether or not that policy holds forever, it has shaped the franchise for decades. The silence is not an oversight, it is by design. But inside the Star Wars universe, that label of unknown carries a far more troubling meaning. A missing file is not the same thing as a missing population. In Attack of the Clones, an entire planet was erased from the Jedi archives, and nobody noticed. Obi-Wan Kenobi tracked a bounty hunter's trail to a world called Kamino, searched the archives for its location, and found nothing. The Jedi librarian Jocasta Nu dismissed his concern entirely, insisting that anything absent from the archives simply did not exist. Yoda recognized the truth right away. A missing entry was not proof that something did not exist, it was evidence that someone had removed it. Count Dooku, still technically a member of the Jedi Order at the time, had deliberately deleted Kamino from the database to conceal a secret cloning operation. Tales of the Jedi later showed this moment on screen. This directly applies to the mystery surrounding Yoda's kind. If a full planet with oceans, cities, and a population of millions could vanish from the most comprehensive database in the galaxy without a single alarm, then the absence of information about one people proves nothing at all. It does not mean that they are rare. It does not mean that they are fading. It means the archives were incomplete, and the system that produced them was never as reliable as the Jedi believed. The Living Force depicts the Jedi in their final operational years as an order so weighed down by procedure that its members had stopped questioning what might be missing from their own files. Gaps were not treated as warnings, they were accepted, unexamined, part of the background noise of an organization that had confused its filing system with the truth. The Jedi's blindness went far beyond sloppy bookkeeping. Every known member of Yoda's kind was found through the Order, a book with its own priorities, its own blind spots, and its own reasons to restrict what it shared. That means our entire picture of this people is not a population count, it is one Order's recruitment ledger and nothing more. Jedi Seekers travel the galaxy identifying Force-sensitive infants and bringing them to temples for training. That process is the cleanest explanation for why all three known members share extraordinary Force abilities, and why the rest of the population, if it exists, has never appeared in a single file. The Order did not catalog people, it collected the ones it could use. Still, one overlooked detail points to a wider picture. All three known members are Force-sensitive. Grogu, at just 50 years old, can move objects with the Force, heal wounds, and perform abilities that most fully trained Jedi take decades to master. The Alien Archive documents Yaddle's mastery of Morocro, an ancient technique that could slow a living being's body functions almost to a complete stop, so rare that by the High Republic era, it was considered practically mythical. Yoda's raw power needs no further explanation. The conclusion seems obvious. Every member must be Force-sensitive by nature, but that conclusion only holds if the Jedi were seeing the full population. They were not. Humans, Togrutas, Zabraks, and dozens of other people all produce both Force-sensitive and non-Force-sensitive individuals. The Jedi only recruited the Force-sensitive ones. In Tales of the Jedi, Yaddle speaks with completely normal sentence structure. Her words follow standard word order. This is strikingly different from Yoda's famous inverted speech, one of the most recognizable traits in all of Star Wars since The Empire Strikes Back. No explanation has ever been offered for why two members of the same kind talk so differently. This matters more than it might seem at first. Language is one of the deepest markers of where a person comes from. If the way they speak is not hardwired, but shaped by culture and upbringing, then Yoda and Yaddle come from different backgrounds, different formative environments entirely. That points towards a people with cultural variety, possibly spread across multiple worlds or regions, with only a tiny fraction ever coming into contact with the Jedi Order. And if that variety exists, the way they age, reproduce, and recover from loss may be far more complex than 3 Jedi examples could ever reveal. 3 data points from a single recruiting pipeline cannot define an entire people, no matter how powerful these 3 individuals happen to be. Meanwhile, a council member was struck down by a fellow Jedi, and the Order never even noticed. Yaddle had picked up on Dooku's suspicious behavior in the aftermath of the confrontation on Naboo and followed him to a secret meeting on Coruscant. There, she found him standing alongside Darth Sidious himself. The Dark Lord ordered Dooku to end her as a final test of his commitment to the dark side. Yaddle was not a helpless figure. She was a 400-year-old Jedi Master with lifetimes of training and a seat on the Council. The two fought, and Dooku used the Force to collapse a heavy doorway, trapping Yaddle beneath it. She lifted the debris, but collapsed from the effort, and Dooku delivered the final blow with his lightsaber. A being who had served the light side of the Force for 400 years was cut down in a corridor, alone, with no one coming to help. The entire confrontation played out on screen in Tales of the Jedi. Jedi Knights number 5 later revealed that Yaddle had previously saved Dooku's life during the early stages of his corruption, making her fate at his hands all the more tragic. She had shown him mercy when he was at his most vulnerable, and he repaid that mercy by ending her life. The Order, blinded by the growing darkness clouding the Force, never uncovered the truth. No investigation into her disappearance ever succeeded, and the real circumstances stayed buried for decades. A council member vanished, and the most powerful Force-wielding Order in the galaxy simply moved on. Yet even Yoda himself failed to sense it. In the novel Out of the Shadows, Yaddle returns early from a sabbatical simply because she missed her time with the young students she trained. She was a scholar, a teacher, and a council member who had dedicated lifetimes to the Order that had shaped her. That devotion makes the failure to notice her disappearance even more condemning. In 3 ABY, while preparing for Luke Skywalker's arrival on Dagobah, Yoda entered the Darkside Cave and experienced a vision. The Yoda comic series by Kevin Scott depicted what he found there, an image of Dooku standing over Yaddle's body, offering only one explanation, that Yoda had allowed it to happen. That accusation carries enormous weight. Yoda was the Grand Master, the most powerful Force user alive, and one of only 2 known living members of Yaddle's kind. The Force connected him to every living thing in the galaxy, and yet, the death of someone who shared his blood, his seat on the Council, and possibly his home world passed without a tremor he could identify. For roughly 30 years, he had no idea. If the Force bond between 2 members of the same kind, both sitting on the same council, in the same temple, was not enough to detect a killing, then that bond cannot be relied on to protect anyone else. Grogu's story follows the same thread of Jedi dependency. He was raised at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, trained by multiple masters over the years, and survived Order 66 only because Jedi Master Kelleran Beck fought through waves of clone troopers to rescue him. Even his life with the Mandalorian bounty hunter Din Djarin, which appears to exist outside the Jedi framework, is rooted entirely in Jedi intervention at its origin. And the most telling absence may be the home world itself. No source has ever shown Yoda willingly disclosing where he came from to anyone during his 900 years of life. A well-known planet in the Republic's core systems would not have required that level of secrecy from someone who served the Order openly for so long. The simplest explanation is that the home world sits outside the Republic's knowledge entirely, somewhere in the Outer Rim, wild space, or unknown regions. The Chiss Ascendancy thrived in those regions for thousands of years without the Republic knowing they existed, which confirms that entire civilizations can remain undetected indefinitely. If a full military power with fleets and territory could stay off the map, a single world populated by a quiet, slow-growing people could do the same without effort. 3 known faces is not the same thing as 3 total members, but that distinction, as comforting as it sounds, does not solve the problem. Even if the total population is larger than 3, their growth cycle means that any loss takes lifetimes to recover from, and that is where the real danger begins. The broken archives are only half the problem, because time itself is what makes Yoda's kind so fragile. Chapter 2: The Slowest Clock. For a people this slow to recover from loss, The purge that destroyed the Jedi may have been a final blow. Order 66 is primarily remembered as a collapse of the entire Jedi Order in a single coordinated strike. Clone troopers across the galaxy turned on their Jedi commanders and cut them down. Temples burned and masters fell. Padawans who had fought alongside their clone soldiers for years were shot in the back without warning. The Order, which had stood for over 1,000 generations, was wiped out in a matter of hours. The galaxy lost thousands of Force users in a single day, and the survivors scattered into every corner of known space. Most of the dead were human, Twi'lek, Togruta, and other common peoples. For them, the losses were devastating, but recoverable within a few generations. For Yoda's kind, the math behind that tragedy works on a completely different scale. The confirmed ages of the 3 known members paint a deeply unsettling picture. Yoda was born around 896 BBY and passed on Dagobah in 4 ABY at the age of 900, a number he confirmed himself in Return of the Jedi. Star Wars timelines place the start of his training career at approximately 100 years old, and in The Empire Strikes Back, he mentioned that he had been training Jedi for 800 years. Yaddle was born around 509 BBY, close to 400 years after Yoda. At the time of The Phantom Menace, she was approximately 477 years old, a mature adult, serving actively on the Jedi Council. When Dooku ended her life shortly after the confrontation on Naboo, she was barely past the halfway point of what Yoda's lifespan suggests their kind can naturally reach. Grogu arrived later still, born around 41 BBY, nearly 500 years after Yaddle. Vast stretches of time separate each known birth. Whether that reflects a naturally low birth rate or simply the narrow window of the Jedi's awareness, the result is the same. From everything we can observe, new life among this people arrives at a pace unlike anything else in the galaxy. No other known people in the Star Wars universe comes close. And then there's Grogu, whose age changes everything. Despite being 50 years old by the calendar, he presents as a very young child, unable to speak or care for himself, reaching for shiny objects, cooing at strangers, falling asleep at the worst possible moments. The Mandalorian made this unmistakable across 3 seasons. He cannot feed himself reliably, he cannot communicate in words, he processes the world the way a human toddler does, with fascination, confusion, and an attention span measured in moments. This is not a being who matured quickly and then stopped developing. He is genuinely young, trapped in the earliest stages of growth by a timeline that stretches far beyond anything the galaxy is built to accommodate. And yet, even in this infantile state, his Force abilities are extraordinary. He lifted a charging mudhorn to save Jaren's life, healed a near-fatal wound with nothing but instinct, and held back a wall of fire from an incinerator trooper while barely conscious afterward. A 50-year-old toddler who can outperform trained adult Jedi in raw Force output. That combination, immense power locked inside a body that cannot yet walk steadily, is unlike anything else in the Star Wars galaxy. It also means that any threat to Grogu is not just a threat to one child, it is a threat to decades of unrealized potential that his kind cannot afford to lose. Based on these 3 data points, a rough growth timeline begins to emerge. This is an estimate drawn from extremely limited data, not just an established profile. But the direction is clear. If 50 years equals early toddlerhood, their kind develops far more slowly than any other known people in the galaxy, perhaps 10 to 15 times slower than humans. Carrying that estimate forward, adolescence might not begin until well past 100 years of age. Yoda's ability to begin training other Jedi at around 100 suggests he had reached early adulthood by that point. But even that early benchmark is staggering, 100 years of childhood. Even the most generous reading means a single new generation takes longer to arrive than most civilizations take to rise and fall. In nature, long-lived animals built this way are the most vulnerable on Earth. Elephants, great apes, and whales all produce few offspring, mature slowly, and invest heavily in each individual. Their recovery from a population crash can take 50 to 70 years, and they have the fastest growth timelines among slow-developing animals. For a people where a single generation might span 300 to 500 years, recovery from a significant loss could take thousands. The exact numbers are fictional, but the principle holds. Now consider what Order 66 meant against that math. If any members beyond Yoda and Grogu were serving as Jedi when the Purge was carried out, they would have been gunned down alongside every other Jedi in the galaxy. Yaddle was already gone by that point, but any others that the Order had recruited over the preceding lifetimes would have been in the crosshairs. Given how long members of this kind live, even a small number of additional Jedi from this people would represent an enormous portion of the active population. Losing even 2 or 3 more adults in a single day would be catastrophic for a people that takes lifetimes to produce replacements. A human population that lost a significant portion of its adults in a single event would feel the consequences within a generation or two, roughly 40 to 60 years. For a people with generation time measured in lifetimes, those same consequences would not become visible for hundreds of years. The population might appear stable on the surface, while the loss silently compounded underneath, with fewer births in the next cycle, fewer parents to raise those young, and a narrowing of the gene pool that would only become clear long after anyone could fix it. The wound and the death can be separated by ages, and no one alive at the time of the wound would ever see the full cost. By the time the damage became obvious, every witness to the original catastrophe would be long gone. There is a darker possibility underneath all of this. If the Force connection in Yoda's kind is deeply tied to how they're built, and if that connection comes at a cost of slower development, fewer offspring, and longer timescales, then their rarity might not be a crisis at all. It might be the price of what they are. Every known member demonstrates Force abilities so far beyond the baseline that it suggests something fundamental about their makeup, not a gift that some members receive, but a defining trait built into the very fabric of what they are. If true, they were always walking the edge, long before Order 66 ever made things worse. The Force did not fail them. It's the reason they were always few. Still, Grogu's birth tells us something important. His arrival around 41 BBY means that at least one member was alive and able to reproduce during the final decades of the Republic. That is the only confirmed sign that new life was still being produced in the years before everything fell apart. But what happened to those parents is completely unknown. Whether they were Jedi, whether they lived on the home world, whether they outlasted the fall of the Republic, no source has answered that. Grogu's existence confirms reproduction was still happening roughly 50 years before The Mandalorian. It confirms nothing about whether that continued afterward. There is also a gap in Grogu's own timeline that carries weight. Jedi Master Kelleran Beck rescued him from the Jedi Temple during Order 66, fighting through clone troopers and escaping Coruscant aboard a Naboo starfighter. Grogu was approximately 22 years old at the time, still very much an infant by his kind standards. But between that escape and his appearance on Arvala 7, roughly 2 decades later, in the custody of Nikto mercenaries, almost nothing is known. Someone protected him for over 20 years. Someone fed him, sheltered him, and kept him out of sight on a remote Outer Rim world, far from any known Jedi sanctuary. No source reveals who that protector was. If it was a member of his own kind, a parent, a relative, or elder, then at least one more adult was alive during that era. That would mean the population maintained a presence beyond the Jedi Order, even after the Purge, tucked away somewhere in the galactic frontier. If it was someone else entirely, a sympathetic stranger with no connection to the Jedi, then Grogu's safety was a matter of individual compassion rather than any community support. Either answer changes what the future might look like, and neither has been given. And the most powerful regime in galactic history already figured out exactly how valuable that body was. Chapter 3: Raw Material. After the Republic fell, the new regime looked at Yoda's kind and saw only something to harvest. The transformation was total. Yoda had been the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, the most respected living Jedi in the galaxy. Yaddle had been a council member, a scholar, a teacher of generations. Their kind carried an association with wisdom, with the Force, with the highest form of authority the galaxy recognized. For hundreds of years, simply seeing a member of this kind in the Jedi Temple was a reminder of how deep the Order's roots ran. When the Jedi fell, and a new power rose to take their place, the association did not disappear. It was converted into a price tag. The mystery became an opportunity, and Grogu became the focus of a bounty. A child who, in another era, would have been raised as a Jedi was valued not for his potential wisdom or his connection to the living Force, but for what ran through his veins. The remnants of the old regime had watched the Jedi for decades. They knew what the Order's most powerful members looked like, and they understood the connection between that power and the midichlorians that made it measurable. And when they found a child of that same lineage, alone and unprotected, they knew exactly what they had found. Even before Grogu was captured, the pipeline was already built. The Camino and cloning facilities that produced the Republic's clone army were constructed under the secret direction of the Dark Lords. After the Republic was overthrown, Caminoan expertise was extracted and transferred to a facility called Mount Tantus on the remote world of Wayland. The Bad Batch showed what was happening inside those walls. Scientists under Dr. Royce Hemlock continued cloning research under a project eventually known as Project Necromancer, an effort to create a Force-sensitive clone body. The series also exposed a darker layer. Mount Tantus held imprisoned young Force users with high midichlorian counts, taken from their families, and held as test subjects. These were not volunteers, they were children, ripped from their homes and locked in cells. Their bodies studied and sampled for the benefit of a regime that viewed Force sensitivity as a resource to be mined. This was not a rogue operation, it was a program with deep roots, long-term goals, and no moral boundaries. Dr. Pen Pershing is the next link in this chain. His uniform insignia in The Mandalorian connects him to the Mount Tantus program, and his specialization in cloning and Force-sensitive physiology makes him a direct heir to the Kaminoan tradition. What the earlier stages of the project lacked was material with a sufficiently high midichlorian count to make Force-sensitive cloning viable. Grogu was the missing ingredient. Working for a remnant faction led by Moff Gideon, Pershing placed a bounty on the child alongside an individual known only as the Client. When Din Djarin delivered Grogu to a safe house on Navarro, Pershing extracted a small sample. The Client wanted a more aggressive extraction, one that risked ending the child's life. Pershing pushed back, insisting that Grogu be kept alive. Official Star Wars material describes his reaction as selfless in at least one instance, but the broader context tells a more complicated story. Grogu was not a patient, he was a source that the regime's remnants intended to draw from indefinitely. Even after Djarin's rescue, the experiment simply moved to a different lab. Pershing continued his work at a separate facility on Navarro, injecting samples drawn from Grogu into volunteer test subjects, attempting to transfer the child's extraordinarily high midichlorian count into non-Force sensitive hosts. But inside those tanks, the results were catastrophic. The volunteers' bodies initially showed promising responses, then rejected the samples entirely, leaving behind deformed, unrecognizable remains suspended in fluid. Pershing exhausted his supply and sent a desperate recording to Moff Gideon, requesting renewed access to what he called the donor. That single word strips Grogu of every quality that defines him: his name, his connection to the Force, his childhood. In the language of the research apparatus, he is an input in an industrial process, not a child, not a survivor, a renewable source that the regime intended to drain as long as his body could reproduce. 900 years of accumulated wisdom compressed into a label that fits on a lab report. On top of the broader program, Moff Gideon added his own personal layer of ambition. Season 3 of The Mandalorian revealed Gideon's true agenda. He had diverted resources to clone himself and give those clones Force sensitivity derived from what had been taken from Grogu. He wanted to build a dynasty of Force-sensitive copies, a private army grown from stolen physiology. The project was not driven by loyalty to any cause or broader ideology. It was vanity on a galactic scale, and Gideon viewed the Force itself as nothing more than a feature to be grafted onto a better version of himself. The child was no longer even a donor at this point, he was raw fuel for one man's ego. Worse still, this research outlived the regime. After Gideon's capture, Pershing entered the New Republic's amnesty program, rebranding his cloning work as medical science. He presented himself as a researcher whose expertise had been corrupted by his superiors, someone who wanted to use his skills for good. But a former operative named Elia Kane manipulated him into resuming his work, then sabotaged his rehabilitation. She effectively destroyed Pershing as a New Republic asset while keeping his knowledge available to whatever remnant faction she still served. The New Republic did not even realize it had been infiltrated. The research adapted and found new hosts, just as the remnants always did. The failed experiments bear a noted resemblance to Supreme Leader Snoke, the artificial being who would later lead the First Order during the sequel trilogy. That visual connection suggests the samples taken from Grogu may have fed into the research chain that eventually produced Snoke and contributed to the return of Palpatine. The Rise of Skywalker later revealed clone transfer as the secret behind the Emperor's return, and if that connection holds, the strongest reading of evidence is chilling. The body of a child who should have been protected was used to bring back the very regime that destroyed his world. The greatest tragedy would not just be that one of the youngest members of his kind was exploited, it would be that his exploitation helped resurrect the architect of the Jedi's destruction. And the concept that made all of this possible goes back to the prequels. Midichlorians, the microscopic life forms that serve as the bridge between a being and the Force, were first introduced in The Phantom Menace. Within the story's own logic, midichlorians turned the Force from something purely mystical into something measurable, something that could be counted, compared, and most importantly, extracted. Before midichlorians, a being's connection to the Force was spiritual. After midichlorians, it was physical. That single shift changed everything. Hershing's experiments proved that midichlorian-rich samples can be harvested and injected into other beings. The experiments failed, but the principle was established. Force sensitivity is a transferable physical resource. For a people where every known member carries extraordinarily high midichlorian counts, this transforms every living individual into a prize of enormous value. Not because of who they are, but because of what can be taken from them. The Force, once treated as sacred, has been reduced to a substance that can be drawn from a vein. The shift from spiritual to physical did not just change how the galaxy understood the Force, it changed what people with power were willing to do to get it. Even if hundreds or thousands of members exist on a home world no one has found, the knowledge that their bodies can be harvested makes every one of them a prize the moment they are discovered. Coming out of obscurity means drawing attention. Participating in galactic life means being turned into a resource. Helping rebuild any order or government means exposing their members to a research apparatus that already knows what their physiology is worth. Obscurity offers safety but guarantees irrelevance. Visibility offers purpose, but guarantees becoming raw material. And for a people that takes lifetimes to recover from a single loss, one miscalculation could set the population back by 1,000 years. The galaxy stopped seeing sages a long time ago, and nothing Grogu has done changes that. Chapter 4: The Inescapable Trap. Every path forward leads Grogu deeper into the same danger, and the math does not bend. The labs may be shut down, but the knowledge endured. The science behind the midichlorian transfer experiments did not disappear when Moff Gideon fell. Every scientist who worked on Project Necromancer, every technician who processed the samples, every officer who read the reports, carries a piece of that knowledge. That information is scattered across the galaxy now, embedded in minds and in files that no single authority controls. And the galaxy that awaits Grogu is not a peaceful one. The New Republic has already shown it cannot protect its own amnesty subjects from sabotage. It cannot even detect a single operative working inside its own rehabilitation program. The government that was supposed to replace the Empire cannot secure its own hallways. That is the galaxy Grogu is navigating right now, one that cannot protect him even when it is trying to. Din Djarin rescued the child from the very forces that wanted to use him. He had already delivered Grogu for payment, collected the bounty, walked away with his reward, and could have disappeared into the Outer Rim without looking back. No one would have blamed him. The guild expected compliance, not conscience. And then, something shifted. He went back, fought his way through armed guards, and took the child. He gave up his standing with the Bounty Hunters Guild, put his own tribe in danger, and built an entirely new life around a being he barely understood. What started as a contract became something that neither of them had experienced before. For Djarin, a solitary warrior raised in a culture of war, the child gave him something to protect beyond a creed. For Grogu, A survivor of the worst night in Jedi history, the bounty hunter offered something no order or temple ever had. Not just safety, but a bond that was chosen rather than assigned. The Jedi had trained Grogu because of what he was. Djarin protected him because of who he was becoming. That distinction between being valued for your nature and being valued for yourself is the most important difference in the child's entire story. And as Grogu grew, he began choosing back. By Season 2, he reached out through the Force on the ancient Seeing Stone of Tython and connected with Ahsoka Tano. She sensed his history, learning his name and feeling the fear and loss that still clung to him from the fall of the temple. She refused to train him, concerned that his attachment to Djarin could lead him down the same dark path that had destroyed Anakin Skywalker. The same attachment the Jedi had always warned against was now the defining force in the life of one of the last known members of Yoda's kind. Grogu ultimately went with Luke Skywalker for Jedi training, and Djarin removed his helmet for the first time in front of another person so the child could see his face before they parted. Then came the turning point that defined his future. In the Book of Boba Fett, Luke presented Grogu with a choice that cut to the heart of his identity: continue Jedi training or return to Din Djarin. Grogu chose Djarin. He chose the Father over the Order, the relationship over the tradition. For a child who had lost everything in the Temple fire, the choice was not between power and love, it was between two versions of belonging, and he picked the one that had never let him down. This was not a rejection of the Force. He will carry his Force abilities for the rest of his life, regardless of where he goes. It was a rejection of the idea that the Jedi, the same order whose blind spots had already failed his kind, was the only framework that could define him. For a people whose entire known history is wrapped up in the Jedi, choosing to walk away from that order is a break from every recorded precedent. It also means that the one organization in the galaxy that might have had the resources and the knowledge to help protect his kind no longer has a claim on him. He is free, but he's also alone in a way that no previous member of his kind has been. In Season 3, that choice took a name. Grogu participated in Mandalorian rituals, accompanied Djarin on missions, and was formally recognized as his foundling and apprentice. He wore Mandalorian armor forged from Beskar, the sacred metal of the culture that had taken him in. In the episode The Foundling, he relived his rescue from the burning Jedi Temple during Order 66, a flashback recently expanded by the Star Wars Jar Jar comic series, which placed Jar Jar Binks and Naboo soldiers in the escape alongside Jedi Master Kelleran Beck. One belonging ended in fire, another was just beginning. By the season finale, Grogu had taken the name Din Grogu, following Mandalorian naming custom. Names carry enormous weight in Star Wars. Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader, Ben Solo became Kylo Ren. Each transformation marked a fundamental shift in identity. Grogu adapting the name Din Grogu marks his formal acceptance of Mandalorian identity and his bond with Din Djarin as something permanent. He took his father's name not because his blood demanded it, but because his belonging did. In a galaxy that reduced him to the donor, he now carries a name that belongs to no research file and no laboratory log. But chosen belonging does not solve the equation underneath. Grogu still carries the same midichlorian count that made him a prize. He still belongs to a people that takes lifetimes to produce a single generation. A Mandalorian name and Beskar armor offer protection, but they do not change what he is. If Grogu lives as long as Yoda did, he has roughly 850 years ahead of him. That sounds like a long time, but he will not reach full maturity for decades, possibly longer. He will not be capable of reproduction for even longer than that, and his offspring would take just as long to mature themselves. One generation of recovery takes longer than the entire lifespan of the Galactic Republic. The Republic rose, governed the galaxy, fought the Clone Wars, and fell to the Empire in less time than it would take for Grogu's hypothetical grandchildren to reach adulthood. No amount of armor or belonging changes what those numbers mean for the future of his kind, and the very qualities that defined his kind are the ones that make recovery nearly impossible. Their extraordinary force sensitivity makes every living member a prize. Their slow development means every loss takes lifetimes to recover from. Their long lifespans create the illusion of stability, while the population silently narrows underneath. A single elder can live long enough to mask the fact that no new generation has arrived to take their place. The galaxy does not wait for slow peoples. It moves at the speed of the fastest ones, and Yoda's kind has never been fast at anything except using the Force. Yoda himself proved that his kind could outlast anything the galaxy threw at them, but even his endurance came with limits. In the Clone Wars Season 6, Yoda undertook a journey guided by the Force priestesses to learn the secret of preserving consciousness beyond life, the ability to become a Force ghost. He succeeded, and the journey itself showed how far beyond the Jedi mainstream his understanding of the Force had grown. When he appeared to Luke in The Last Jedi, his consciousness persisted beyond the reach of anyone who would have used him as a resource. He could speak, teach, and even call lightning down on a tree full of ancient Jedi texts. But Force ghosts do not reproduce, they do not raise young, they do not contribute to any population. Yoda's continuation beyond the physical is the most complete form of individual preservation his kind has ever achieved, and it does nothing for their future. The upcoming film, The Mandalorian and Grogu, reinforces this direction. Neither the film's creators nor its marketing have framed the story as an original reveal or a homeworld discovery. Everything released so far points towards a story about a father and a son navigating a galaxy that is still not safe for either of them. The trajectory is clearly towards a character whose significance lies in who he's becoming, not in what he might one day reproduce. That is a meaningful story for one character. It is not a future for an entire people. Viewed through this lens, Grogu is irreplaceable in the most literal sense. The only previous attempt to bridge the Jedi and Mandalorian traditions was Tari Vizsla, the sole confirmed Mandalorian Jedi. He created the Darksaber, the weapon that would define Mandalorian leadership for lifetimes after his death. But his legacy collapsed into further hostility between the two cultures the moment he was gone. One individual, no matter how extraordinary, could not permanently bridge two civilizations by himself. Grogu carries both traditions forward, but legacy is not the same as lasting. If he is lost at 50, his kind does not just lose one member, it loses an individual who would not have reached full maturity for decades, or even lifetimes more. It loses the only living being who bridges two cultures that have been at war for most of recorded history. That is not simply one fewer name on a list, it is a gap in their future that nothing can fill. And every day he walks in the open, he is one step closer to the kind of loss his people cannot afford. A 50-year-old child carrying Jedi knowledge, Mandalorian belonging, and the memory of a people the galaxy tried to forget. He's already survived the worst the galaxy could throw at him. He chose his own father. He earned his own name. He wears Beskar not because he was born to it, but because someone decided he was worth protecting. And he still has lifetimes ahead of him. But lifetimes are not enough when each generation takes longer to arrive than most civilizations take to rise and fall. The galaxy has already shown what it does when it finds a member of his kind. It measured him. It harvested him. It reduced 900 years of accumulated wisdom to a sample in a vial. The labs are gone, but the knowledge is not. The regime fell, but the remnants adapted and found new hosts. The playbook is already written, sitting in the memory of every researcher and officer who ever touched Project Necromancer. And the next time someone finds a member of this kind, they will not need to build the apparatus from scratch. The blueprint already exists. 3 known faces across 900 years of history, and the youngest of them is just getting started, walking into a galaxy that has already proven it will not let its kind exist in peace. If they are to endure, it'll need something far greater than one child's courage, something far greater than one Mandalorian father's protection, and so far, nothing in the galaxy has offered that. For a species measured in centuries, a single lifetime is as close to a complete record as anyone gets. But the story doesn't end here. 900 years of it belong to one member, from the order he helped build to the swamp he chose to die in. It is the fullest account there is of what one of them can do with the time they get. Watch the entire story of Master Yoda next.